Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you, and welcome to today's true crime episode. I am so happy you are here. I am so happy that somehow in all of this that we're forced to deal with on the day-to-day, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be having a true crime marathon. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out new videos every single week, sometimes 2 a week like this week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us. But before we get into the details of today's case, I first need to say a big thank you to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Dossier. Dossier is a fragrance company that creates luxury scents, but at a fraction of the luxury price point. Where many luxury perfumes can cost anywhere from $50 to hundreds of dollars, Dossier perfumes range anywhere from $29 to $49. And in addition to having scents that are inspired by designer fragrances, they also have their own line of Dossier originals, which if you've been here for a while, you know I love. So today I have one of Dossier's newest fragrances. This is from their Icons collection, and it's called It Factor. And let me tell you, Icon is a good way to describe it because this is the type of scent that makes the wearer feel like they are the main character. It gives main character energy, but in a good way. So with notes like ginger, musk, and brown sugar, it's like spicy and smoky, but also like creamy and addictive. Exactly how I personally like to describe myself, if I do say so myself. And it's hard for me to describe scents, but it's definitely like intoxicating and addictive, and I feel like it's the type of scent that will definitely get people's heads turning and have people asking like, what are you wearing? But it's like the kind of smell that's also effortless, like the type of thing that you could throw in your bag and put on at any given time, whether you're just getting out of the gym or going to a fancy dinner. I think that you would still feel like comfortable and feminine and pretty. So if you'd like to try It Factor out for yourself or any more of their unforgettable scents, because if you've been here a while, you know I've given you a number of recommendations. Make sure to click the link in my description box and pick up your new favorite perfume or perfumes today. Now, I just want to say a big thank you to Dossier for partnering with me on today's video. It's partners like Dossier that make it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock, don't ever change. Now, with all of that said, we can get into this video. So again, I said that today is going to be a true crime compilation. It's been a while since I put out a video like this. I took a little break for a while, but I am back. I know a lot of you enjoy these, and it's just a super long video that you can put on and hear several cases that I think need more coverage, cases that didn't get as many people to see it, or just ones that I feel like are worth making sure people hear. And it's also a long video for those of you who don't like silence, because that's the type of person I am. I tend to put on a video from a comfort YouTuber that's super long to have in the background of my life, because I don't like to just sit alone with the sounds and with my head. It's not something I'm super into. And I know that a lot of you are the same, and a lot of you consider me to be your comfort YouTuber, which is crazy, but thank you. And so this is for you. If you want a super long video, this is for you. If you want to hear about some cases that maybe you haven't heard about before, like in long form, this is for you. If you want something to put on for your dog while you go out to the store, this is for you. And you know what? No matter who you are, this is for you. So just keep on watching. Today we're going to be talking about a crime that rocked Scotland in 2018, and that was the murder of 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail. This case is horrifying and so sad, dude. And once you hear about everything that happened to her, who did it, why, and the craziness of this person's trial, it's just insane. So today I'm going to tell you that whole story, and when I am done, I'm going to ask you the question of the day, and I want you to keep it in your mind during this video. And that question is this: do you believe that Alesha's killer got the appropriate sentence? And if not, what do you think he did deserve? Now, with all of that said, please come, gather around, and let me tell you the horrible story of the murder of 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail. Now, I want to start this video off with a quote from Alesha's mother that I think perfectly captures the horror that was what happened to this little girl. Her mother, Jeannie, said of her daughter's murder, and I quote, "Even the devil itself would be disgusted in what that thing has done." 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail was born October 22nd, 2011, and she was a beautiful little girl, an actual spitting image of her mother. It's insane how much she looked like her mama. They could be twins if they weren't mother and daughter. Yeah. Alesha was a typical wonderful child. She was friendly, full of love, good-natured. She loved gymnastics, riding her bike, helping bake cakes, listening to music. She loved acting, performing in school shows like The Lion King. She wanted to be a YouTuber, and she would even, oh my God, she would watch YouTube, which adorable, but even more adorable. She made YouTube videos talking about her love of pasta. And if that's not so pure it can make your heart fucking explode when you hear what happens to her, I don't know what is. Alesha was said to have a gentle soul, and she was the type of child that left a lasting impression on anybody who encountered her. She was super friendly. Like during breakfast club at school, she was the first kid to welcome everyone first thing in the morning because she was just like a little considerate thing. She was popular with all the other kids in her school, and she was even often late for her classes because she would stay back just chatting away with somebody because she was just so friendly. She was just a happy, smiley girl. She loved unicorns and butterflies and bubbles and Peppa Pig. She was literally a 6-year-old girl. On July 2nd, 2018, Alesha was asleep in her bed. Well, not her normal bed. It was the bed that she had at the home that her father and her grandparents shared. Alesha's parents had her very young. I believe her mother, Georgina, who went by Jeannie, was only 16 when she had her, which would have made her father, Robert, about 20. Now, I didn't see how long they were together when Alesha was born, but I did see that they separated when Alesha was only 3 months old. So that's hard, right? That would be hard for anybody. I have said before, being a parent, hardest thing in the world. Being a mother, no offense to fathers, but like, get out of here. That is the toughest thing in the world. It's a totally different experience. I can say that firsthand now from seeing it, living it. It's different. So to go through that, separating, being a single mother, yes, did they have joint custody? Yes, but she had Alesha most of the time. She had Alesha all the time, and Robert had Alesha every other weekend, from the way I understand it. And that would be really hard for anybody to deal with, but apparently Jeannie just like loved Alesha. She was her whole world, and she said of her daughter's birth, and I quote, "I was only 16 and she changed my life for the better. She gave me the best 6.5 years of my life." So when the couple did split when Alesha was 3 years old, it was decided that they would have joint custody, but Alesha was going to stay with her mother and her sister Courtney on the mainland for the majority of the time. And she would come over every other weekend to stay with her father, her father's parents, which were her grandparents, Caleb and Angela, and her father Robert's girlfriend of 2 years, which was a girl named Tony. All 4 adults shared a house together on the island, and Alesha was going over like she normally would. It was a little different this time. It was a little different though, because this was the beginning of Alesha's 3-week summer vacation, so she was going to be spending a little more time with her father and her grandparents. She had arrived just a couple of days before she was killed, and she had lots of big plans. The type of plans that only a 6-year-old could have. Well, she wanted pizza, which, I mean, that's a plan for me as well. She wanted to go dancing. She wanted to go to the beach and the swimming pool. She wanted to go for walks in the country. She wanted to play on the trampoline in her father's yard. She wanted to go on a children's train and do donkey rides. She was just full of energy. Her father said of this, and I quote, "We were never in. We were always doing something." Before she was abducted, she had had a really good day. She had taken a ferry over to the mainland because she was going to go to a party, but unfortunately when they got there, they had actually missed the party. So instead she went to a park. She had this balloon, and she beat her grandfather in the back of the head with the balloon over and over because she was 6. Later that day, the balloon escaped from her, and she chased it down the beach until it popped. She was 6, and she had a really good day. She ended her day off by having pizza with her family, but of course she had to take a bite of her dad's piece of pizza because his just must have looked so much better than hers did. She went into her grandparents' room and she jumped on top of her grandpa and gave him cuddles and told him that she loved him. And then she went in her room to lay in her bed and watched YouTube videos on her grandma's phone. At around 10 p.m. that night, her father, Robert, went into the room and told her, it's time to get off the cell phone. You've watched enough videos. It's time to go to bed. But, she was an adorable little thing, so she was able to keep watching a little bit longer until the batteries on the phone died. Then she laid in the room bored because the batteries were dead and she couldn't watch her videos anymore, so she started to bang on the wall. So her father went back in there and put in a DVD of Peppa Pig for her to watch until she fell asleep to kind of distract her so she'd stop hitting the wall because she was a little kid. Her grandfather also popped in and let her know, hey, guess what? She's like, what? He's like, I have a cartridge for your bubble machine coming in tomorrow so we can actually use the bubble machine. And she was stoked out of her mind because she loved bubbles. She wanted to have a bubble birthday party one day in her life, so that was really exciting news for her. And then they left her in the room and she watched her DVD until she inevitably fell asleep. And finally, the room was quiet. The adults started winding down for the night. And Robert's girlfriend, Toni, went in the room to check on her one more time before bed and turned the DVD off of Peppa Pig so that everyone could just go to bed for the night. Toni later said in trial through tears of this moment, and I quote, "She was sleeping and her face was facing the wall and her hair was behind her on the pillow." Hours after this, Alesha's murderer entered their home. He opened the door to the sleeping girl's room because it was the door that was closest to the front door. He was able to gain access to the home because the front door was actually unlocked and the key was left in the lock. Apparently, even though it doesn't feel like this was that long ago, this was pretty common for the area, which blows my mind. Apparently, like, this little island was really safe. It was a tight-knit community. They were still the type of place where people weren't locking their doors at night because they just felt like everyone knew everybody and everyone was safe. He then swooped Alesha up and he left the house, heading down to the beach to walk along the shore because I don't know if I mentioned, but this is a seafront home that she was taken from. As he was walking, Alesha was drowsy, but she started to wake up and she looked up at the person carrying her and was like, who are you? And he said that he was a friend of her father's. He knew her father and he was taking her home. But he was lying. Well, he was sort of lying. He did know her father, but he was not taking her home. He then carried the 6-year-old to a secluded location. Along the way, she said she was cold. So he actually took off his top and gave it to her to keep her warm, which was a big, big difference to what he was going to do next. And that was that he raped her and he murdered her. And then he took his clothes off and he threw them into the sea before heading home like nothing had ever happened. Her murderer was 16-year-old Aaron Campbell. Aaron Campbell was born May 7th, 2002, and he was one of 2 children. He and his sister were both born to parents Jeanette and Christopher. He was born in Shrewsbury, but his family moved to the Isle of Bute when he was a small child. Aaron had a bit of a troubled childhood. Obviously, how else could he do something like this? And according to him, his mother was an alcoholic and his father just wasn't really around much because he had a job that kept him away from home often. And he claimed that he was subject to both physical and emotional abuse. He did have some mental health issues growing up. He was said to have had ADHD and depression and a history of self-harm. But despite this, he was still a popular kid, having many friends at the school he attended, and he was good at math and physics and had plans to go to college and become a video game designer. He liked parkour and he liked to lift weights. He liked making videos of himself on the trampoline and he liked swimming. He was, well-liked, lots of friends. He would often go out and drink and smoke weed and party. He loved gaming and he wanted to be a YouTube star. And he even uploaded a couple of videos to YouTube that have since been taken down, YouTube saying that it was a sign of respect for Alesha's family. All of this is to say that despite the bad upbringing that he says he had, he was pretty well-adjusted, or appeared to be well-adjusted to his peers. His friends just thinking that he had like a dark sense of humor, but it was more than that. There was more bubbling under the surface of this guy, obviously. And by the age of 15, he was already considering doing something excessive or extreme, like raping someone, or necrophilia, because dream big. And he had been feeling this way for a full 12 months before he actually did abduct and murder Alesha. I mean, in 2017, about a year before all of this happened, he had sent a Facebook message to a friend saying, and I quote, "Might kill one day for the lifetime experience." Now, if all of that isn't bad enough, Aaron also had one of those personality traits that we often see in young murderers that make one pause a bit and go, maybe you doing that is a little bit of a red flag, my guy. And I'm going to give you a quick pop quiz so you can kind of guess which one it is and see if you're right, because I know that you guys like this. Did Aaron Campbell, A, enjoy starting fires? B, enjoy torturing animals? Or C, enjoy watching violent pornography? I'm going to give you a second here to put your answer down below. Don't cheat. Pause the video, put your answer, and then I will reveal the truth. The truth? The correct answer. If you answered C, that Aaron enjoyed watching violent pornography, I am so sorry you're wrong. I mean, it's possible that he also enjoyed that, but the verified true answer is actually A. Aaron enjoyed starting fires, and he was even put into a rehabilitation program for this compulsion. Now, you may be wondering how 16-year-old Aaron would even know 6-year-old Alesha. And Alesha didn't live there all the time, so how did he even know that she would be in that bed on that night? Well, apparently, it was all coincidence. Aaron apparently knew Alesha's father, Robert, and Robert's girlfriend, Toni. He even claimed during the trial that he and Toni had a sexual relationship at one point, but it seems by the trial, from what I can tell, it seems like that wasn't true, but we'll get into that a bit later. And I guess that Robert, which was Alesha's dad, used to sell Aaron weed. Aaron loved weed. Big fan of the devil's lettuce. So that's how Robert and he knew each other. They would meet together at a bus stop that was near Aaron's mother's home. They'd do the exchange. He'd give him the money, he'd get the weed, da-da-da-da. But they had recently had a falling out. They were no longer working together over a drug debt. And apparently this was 10 pounds, which is equivalent to $12 US. So it was a super small drug debt. But apparently, like, Aaron thought that Robert's weed was whack. Like, your quality isn't up to par, my guy. So he didn't pay him for it, and they stopped working together. And on top of that, I guess Aaron's mom found out that Robert and his girlfriend were selling her underage child weed, and she was like, could you please stop feeding my child drugs? We are going to get into like the coincidence of him finding her and all that in just a second. I'm just going to tell you what was happening that night. So as Alesha slept in her bed that night, Aaron was having a party at his house to celebrate finishing his exams. So he invited over, it was a pretty decent sized party. He invited over 15 friends, which, okay, to me, that's like a large party because like, I don't even have 15 friends like in real life, you know what I mean? But anyway, he invites them all over on Snapchat. He's like, hey, come over, let's raise the collective roof. They came, they partied, they got drunk on Mad Dog and wine, of all things, and they all left before midnight. Honestly, perfect party, except for the Mad Dog. The wine can stay. Anyway, one friend was still kind of kicking it around at about 12:30, and he found Aaron in his bed, apparently really upset, suicidal. He said that he and his mom had been arguing all night after the party because of some furniture that got damaged during the party, and he was just feeling really down. And his friend was kind of worried about him and was like, okay, would you like me to stay here with you, or would you like to come back to my house? Let's hang out. I don't want to leave you like this. And he's like, no. It's cool, baby. He didn't call him baby. He might have called him baby. It's cool, my guy. He did call him my guy. I'm just going to hang out, I'm going to get stoned, and I'm going to go to bed. So the friend left, and then Aaron, did try to find weed. He contacted a bunch of people, started messaging him on Facebook, texting. He even tried to message Robert, and then was like, oh shit, I owe that guy money. So you know what I'm going to do? Because I'm a genius, a 16-year-old genius. I'm going to instead call Robert's girlfriend and try to get weed off of her. Which is it just shows how young he is and how dumb he is. So he tried to call Toni. He tried calling her at 1:47 a.m., then again at 1:48 a.m. And then finally he realized, like, I'm not going to get a hold of anybody. Nobody's going to sell me weed. So you know what I'm going to do? Great idea. Wonderful idea. I'm going to go steal some weed. And who has some weed? Who usually has weed on tap that I can most likely steal? Robert. So Aaron grabbed a kitchen knife and he left the house. And later when police searched his home when they were investigating this case, they found that there was a knife missing from his mother's block and it matched the knife that was later found. But anyways, he grabs the knife and he makes a short walk over to the home where Alesha slept. It was only about a 5-minute walk. He says when he got there, he found that the door was just open and that it wasn't going to be a struggle for him to get in. So he left the knife on the shore and then entered the home. He says when he entered the home, the first door he saw was Alesha's, and he opened the door and he stumbled upon the little girl. He didn't even know that she was going to be there, and he had no intention of taking her when he first got there. But he said that once he saw her, he felt differently. He said of this moment, and I quote, "At any other time in life, murder would not have been the conclusion. If I was a year younger, I don't think I would have done it. All I thought about was killing her once I saw her." So he scooped Alesha up in what he called a moment of opportunity. And you know what happened next. The indictment said that Aaron removed Alesha's clothes before shaking her violently and then putting his hands over her nose and mouth and around her neck. The following morning, Alesha's grandfather, Calum, C-A-L-U-M, Calum, I believe is how you pronounce it, he got up at 6 a.m. And when he got up, he went in the room to check on Alesha, but he found that there was no sign of her. So he then alerted the rest of the household so that they could search for her. And he said of this, and I quote, "We searched under beds, in wardrobes. There was no sign of her anywhere." They didn't believe that Alesha had left voluntarily because, for one, she had never run away before, and two, her bike was still in the yard. So it's not like why would she walk off when she could ride off on her bike? So they were like, okay, something's clearly wrong here. So at about 6:30 a.m., her grandmother, Angela, called the police and reported her missing. It was at this point that everybody mobilized, really, really searching for her. And Angela posted a post on Facebook to like the local community to to help, anybody that could help, if they would help, to try to locate her faster. Now, while all of this is happening, Toni, Robert's girlfriend, noticed the missed call she had on her phone from the night before from when Aaron was trying to call her to buy weed. She tried calling him back, but he didn't respond to her, or he didn't answer the phone. Later, a couple of hours later, he did send her a text saying that what he needed the night before, it didn't matter anymore. And that makes me so frustrated. He added at the end of this text 2 laughing emojis. It didn't matter anymore. Ha, ha, fucking ha, man. And she was like, okay, that's cool. But if you could do me a favor and be on the lookout for Rob's little girl, Rob's wee girl, because in Scotland they say wee girl, which is just like the cutest thing to me, and it makes me so sad. But she's like, can you watch out for Rob's daughter because she's gone missing? And he responded to this quote, oh, damn. Am sure she's not went too far. And then the letter X, which I assume is like... At first, Toni did think the messages were weird. She thought him calling her was weird, but she had just more important things going on that morning, obviously, so she just kind of put them out of her head. As time went on and Alesha still wasn't recovered, the Scotland police really put it into high gear to try to find her. They brought in a helicopter to search for her, and the Coast Guard even went up and down the shoreline. And it was during the search that the first ominous clue that something horrible had happened to Alesha was discovered. And this was at about 7 a.m. when a knife was found on the beach near the home. And they were like, well, this definitely doesn't look good. And the next thing that was found was even worse. And this was at about 9 a.m. And that's when a man named George Williams made a call into police that he had found something horrible. George had seen Angela's Facebook post where she was asking for help in the search for her granddaughter. And George decided he would go out and do just that. He would try to search for her. And he found more than he bargained for. In a wooded, secluded area, an area where an old hotel used to stand, about 15 minutes away from where Alesha was stolen from her bed, George stumbled upon her naked, lifeless body. He crouched down and tried to feel for a pulse, but there was none. And when he touched her, it was very clear that she was gone. So he called 999 to report what he had found, and he said to the dispatcher, quote, I found the wee girl. She's dead. She was just lying on the ground in that wooded area with a pile of her clothes laying beside her. So the family hadn't heard yet that she was found, because all of this happened really fast. I mean, they noticed that she was gone at 6:30 and she's found by 9. So they didn't know that she had been found yet. And Grandpa and Grandma were standing outside having a conversation when they see an ambulance just whip past them. And Grandpa stops mid-conversation and just yells towards the ambulance, like, if that's my granddaughter, I want to know. Is that my daughter in there? Is that my daughter in there? It was that kind of energy. That's the only way I can relate it, is to Mystic River in my mind. That's where my mind goes. And the family's told, like, hey, go to the police station for an update. So they're put in a room where they sit for 5 minutes before an officer comes in and gives them the horrible news. And that's that she had been found, but she was dead. Now, this is already so fucked up, but you want to hear something that's just going to make you so upset? Oh my God. So Alesha's mother, Jeannie, was 70 miles away when all of this was happening. And she found out that her daughter was dead on Facebook, dude. She found out that she was dead before even knowing that she had gone missing. Now, I don't know how this happened exactly. I don't know the dynamics of the relationship between Jeannie and Robert and Robert's parents. My guess is that they're not good, just from like context clues. There's nothing specific that's said, and I could be way fucking off base here, but just little things like this make me feel like maybe the relationship isn't strong. But basically what happened is Angela posts on Facebook that Alesha's missing. Okay, she's found 2.5 hours later, so there's not a lot of time, like a lot of turnaround time here. So she posts that she's missing. Her body gets found, and articles posted online about her being found, and people go to Angela's page and start flooding her page, her like post about trying to find her with like, RIP, I'm so sorry for your loss, etc., etc., thoughts and prayers, all that bullshit. And this is what Jeannie sees. I saw screenshots of this on like an article where screenshots of Angela's post and all the responses to it. And it just like blows my mind that that is how Jeannie found out. Grandma and Grandpa and Dad said that they did try to call Jeannie. They tried to get a hold of her to tell her, but they weren't able to, which is possible because this was really early in the morning. Maybe she was still asleep, but this is not the way to find out that your kid is dead. I don't know how it could have been avoided. It's just, it is what it is. But my God, it's horrible. And I guess Jeannie even commented on that story, like she hadn't gotten a hold of them yet and was like, what the fuck? Call me, this is my kid. Anyways, back to the investigation. So an autopsy was performed, obviously, and it was determined that Alesha had been brutalized. The 6-year-old had injuries to her neck and her face that indicated she had been gripped, while injuries to her nose and mouth indicated that she had been smothered and her windpipe had been pushed shut. The pathologist determined her death to be, quote, the result of significant forceful pressure to the neck and face, end quote, and if that isn't bad enough, which it is, her genitalia had received, quote, catastrophic injuries, worse than he had ever seen before. Fortunately for police, Alesha's murderer had left DNA, and apparently a lot of DNA. It was found in her pajamas. It was found on her neck. It was found on her face. It was found on 14 different parts of her body. This was a 6-year-old child who had just finished primary 2. It's disgusting. People were just blown away by this, dude. Like, how could you not be? Apparently, like, especially because of the location, because it was on the Isle of Bute. The Isle of Bute was considered to be, quote, one of these places that is incredibly safe. Alesha's funeral was attended by hundreds of mourners who wore pink in her memory. She was buried in a pink casket that was decorated with unicorns, and dozens of bows were tied to the railings of the building, while cuddly toys like teddy bears and unicorns lined the walls outside the funeral home. And at the end of her funeral, a bubble machine was used to spray bubbles all over all of the attendees because, as I said, Alesha loved bubbles and wanted to have a bubble birthday party. Her mother, Jeannie, left her flowers, and with the flowers was a card that was filled out in her daughter's memory, and this card said, and I quote, "To Mummy's little girl, I still can't believe you're gone, my angel. Every single day will be harder than the day before to walk this earth without you by my side. But I can do this for you and your sister. I love you more than this world, princess. Fly high. It's not goodbye. It's only goodnight, my sweetie, until we meet again. Love, Mummy." The funeral director who ran the service called Alesha, quote, the best big sister, the best daughter, the best granddaughter, and friend that anyone could ever ask for. Alesha's uncle, who was named Calum, just like her grandfather, also gave a speech, and he said of Alesha, and I quote, "Alesha would rather hurt than you. She had a great amount of love for absolutely everyone. Alesha is everything that I wanted to be. She was kind, caring, smart. I just cannot believe she's gone. She was the brightest thing." Alesha's teacher, a woman named Emma, also spoke at her service, and she said of Alesha, and I quote, "Alesha was a bright and bubbly little girl. She always came into class with that big, beautiful smile of hers. It was an absolute pleasure to have taught Alesha. I'm so grateful to have known this special little girl." After the funeral, hundreds of people lined the street to watch, what is it called? The funeral procession, like where all the cars drive to the cemetery. They all lined up in the streets to watch this go down, and this was led by a horse-drawn carriage. It had these like white horses, and it looked like Cinderella's like pumpkin carriage. It was so beautiful, and the horses had like these pink feathers, and it carried her small pink casket to the cemetery. And she was just so loved, dude. She was so loved, and everyone felt so fucking bad for her family that even after the funeral, for a while after, people still came and left flowers, cards, all of this outside of her family's home. Now, after she was found, this case was being treated as a homicide because clearly she didn't do these things to herself. The local police commander stated that every available resource of the Scotland Police Department was being used for this investigation. Searches were done all over Bute. The streets were heavily patrolled, and officers even went house to house asking questions. Parts of the island were even cordoned off while forensic experts searched for evidence. The beach was heavily searched, and many items were recovered. In addition to the knife that was initially found, a couple of dog walkers found a fleece jacket, jogging bottoms, boxer shirts, shorts, a t-shirt, and a small girl's discarded pajamas. Now, we come to the person that really helped bring Erin Campbell into police. It's actually really sad because this was Jeanette Campbell. Yeah, Erin's mom. So, man, this whole thing, I feel so bad for her, to be honest. I know that he says that she was an alcoholic and she was abusive. I never did see this confirmed, and some people said that it wasn't true, that she was a wonderful mother. Who knows what's real? Murderers lie, but also different things happen behind closed doors. But either way, this must have been so difficult for her. So basically what happened is that Jeanette decided that she should check her CCTV footage because she knew that she didn't live far from where the little girl went missing, and she thought that maybe she could see something useful on her cameras. I don't know, maybe like the little girl wandering by somebody else, wandering by something that could help the police. And it's lucky that she even had these cameras installed because they weren't always there. I guess at some point her mother lived with her, and her mother had dementia, so she put up the cameras to see if anything, if her mom wandered out in the street, just so that she would be able to keep an eye on her, essentially. Anyway, she checks this footage, and I can only imagine that when she saw what was on the footage, her jaw must have just fell right to the ground, just like me when I was researching this case, because she sees her own son leaving their home multiple times during the time that Alesha was missing. So she goes to where her son's sleeping in his bed. She probably fucking kicked the bed and was like, yo, bro, what the fuck? I don't think that's really what she did, but that's what I would have done. Sir. And he was like, what? And she asked him about it, and he was like, no, what are you talking about? I was out smoking. I was out looking for my phone that I lost after the party. Obviously I'm not connected with what happened to a little girl going missing. And she says that she was satisfied with that. She did believe him. But she still did mention this to a friend of hers, and her and the friend talked and decided that she should still turn the footage over to police, if anything, just to exclude him from being a suspect, in case somebody else came out with footage of him leaving the house. I'm sure that the friend was kind of like, yeah, maybe you turn that into the police just in case, so that you can rule him out as a suspect. But really, low-key, the friend was like, your kid's fucked. You know what I mean? Anyways, even though his mom believed him, the police did not. Or maybe they did a little bit in the beginning because they brought him in as a witness and they questioned him, and they said he was super cooperative, super calm, super chill, didn't act like anything was wrong, answered all the questions, had an answer for everything. Everything was wonderful. But they must have not really believed him because they arrested him on July 4th, and he was transported to a police station in Glasgow where he was questioned again. And by this time, his vibe had changed a bit, and he was no longer answering questions. He said no comment to everything. Later, he told a psychologist once he was arrested that he was, quote, mildly amused that it took police 2 days to arrest him. Anyways, the day after he's arrested, he was charged with the rape and murder of 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail, and he told the High Court, quote, I have never met Alesha MacPhail. So Aaron pled not guilty to the abduction, rape, and murder of Alesha MacPhail. And initially, apparently, during this case, Aaron's identity was kept a secret because he was under 18, but later there was a request put in for his identity to be revealed. Now, apparently in Scotland, if you are tried of a crime, if you are a living victim of a crime, or if you are a witness of a crime, your identity is kept secret forever. But there was a request put in after the verdict was read, and Aaron was found guilty, spoiler alert, of this murder, and his identity was revealed. And apparently this was the first time this had happened in Scotland's history. Now, I personally think it's great that his identity was revealed for a lot of reasons, but one in particular is that, okay, when he pled not guilty, he entered a special defense of incrimination, which essentially means that he claimed that somebody else had committed this murder and named somebody specifically during the trial, right? And this person was over the age of 18, so their identity was released to the media. And their identity, their name, was dragged through the mud because their name was the only name that was synonymous with Alesha's murder. And it was all bullshit and it was all a lie. So I think that he can fuck himself, and his face and his name should be out there instead of this person's, but we're going to get into that more later as well. The trial began in February of 2019, and it lasted for 9 days. And during these 9 days, there was an overwhelming amount of evidence presented against Aaron, both physical and circumstantial, that painted such a clear picture about what happened. The court was shown CCTV footage from cameras installed by Aaron's mother that captured him leaving his house at just before 2 a.m. and returning just after 3:30 a.m., then leaving and returning again for 2 short periods. Additional footage that was supplied by members of the public showed an individual believed to be Aaron walking along the shoreline at 2:25 a.m. carrying something that is believed to have been Alesha. A pathologist also testified that Alesha's feet were clean at the time that her body was found, which indicated that wherever she had gone, however she got to where she was found, is what I mean to say, she was carried. For the 17-minute walk from her home to this place, she was carried, which means that this asshole had 17 minutes to look down at this child, make a different decision, but he chose not to. A cybercrime expert testified that the day before Aaron was arrested, he made a search on his phone that was, quote, how do police find DNA? And then he went to a website that explained the process of collection and like how long DNA stays on, etc., etc. And why was he searching this? Because Alesha's killer had left DNA all over her body, dude. It was on her. It was on her clothes. It was on the killer's clothes that were then thrown into the sea. And all of this DNA was found to be a match to Aaron. A forensic scientist even said the odds of the intimate samples belonging to anyone else was more than 1,000,000,000 to 1. And as if that wasn't damning enough, which it is, a 16-year-old girl also testified at trial that hours after Alesha's body was found, Aaron had made a Snapchat video, like a mirror selfie of him in the mirror. And he sent this to 25 people. And he had the words on the screen that said, "Found the guy who done it," in reference to Alesha's murder. His best friend said of this Snapchat message, and I quote, "At the time knowing him, I thought it was a joke. He had a dark sense of humor. A lot of us do." He continued while looking at his friend in the courtroom saying, quote, "I was one of the last folk to think he'd done it. A lot of folk jumped on the bandwagon once he was arrested." He then paused and said, "Now, I'm not so sure." Aaron's mother also testified that the clothing that was found on the beach did look like clothing that had belonged to Aaron. She also testified that the knife that was found on the beach did look like a knife that was missing from her knife block. And she said that even though she did believe his story when he told her that he had nothing to do with what happened to Alesha and he had been out, smoking, looking for his phone, all that, she did believe him. But when he got home, he came home missing clothes that he had been wearing when he left, and he came home and got straight in the shower. Now, this guy's defense was wild. First, he tells the court that he was getting weed, right? He was buying weed. A couple people testified that he tried to get weed, but that nobody had supplied him weed. He then says that he was out looking for his lost phone, the same thing he told his mom. And then he said that he had spent that night having sex with Toni, Alesha's dad's girlfriend, okay? He said that they had been having sex for a long time, that they were like friends with benefits, right? And then on this night, they were in a garage, banging. And that during intercourse, she alluded to the fact that she had murdered Alesha because sweet nothings. He then said that she had kept the condom the two of them had used, and that she had then taken that condom and used that to plant his DNA all over Alesha's body. What? That is absolutely such a wild thing to claim, especially considering how brutalized this little girl was. Her condition was so bad that forensic scientists and officers had trouble keeping their composure while they were presenting evidence, and one officer broke down crying in the witness box, okay? But his attorney basically said that Toni was jealous of Alesha. Toni was jealous of the positive attention that Alesha got from her father. They essentially said that Robert was physically abusive to Toni, but wonderful to Alesha, and that this just drove her crazy. And when she was asked like how she felt and if she could believe that people were saying that she was jealous enough of Alesha to kill her, like jealous enough of her boyfriend's daughter to kill her, she said, and I quote, "I always knew that Alesha would come first. I knew that if I wanted to be in a relationship with Rob, I would have to accept them both." So she was just like, what the fuck, dude? Like, she said that she loved Alesha to pieces. And Alesha's grandmother, Angela, even said that Toni and Alesha had a wonderful relationship. This poor woman, dude, like, I feel so bad for her to have her name linked with something so horrible. To have this person accuse you of something so disgusting. And then for this person to be able to stay anonymous so that your name is the only name that's linked with this and everyone is talking about it and thinking that you did something, especially when this is a child who you love. That is horrible, dude. Like, and she said that she felt horrible, and she added, and I quote, "She knew that I loved her, and that's what I'm trying to keep in my head. I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm angry. Lots of different emotions." Aaron was brazen as fuck, dude. He answered questions on the stand for hours without accepting any breaks that were offered to him by the judge, and he was able to explain away every piece of evidence like it was no big deal. And he was, quote, "strikingly composed, unfazed, and articulate." He agreed that blaming an innocent person for this crime would be an evil thing to do, and said that he had met Alesha, but he had not killed her, saying, and I quote, "Absolutely not. I could never do that." The judge said that Aaron had a staggering lack of remorse and not even a flicker of emotion during the trial. And basically, once the verdict was read, he was just like, get out of here, get away from me. It's up to people in the future to decide if you're ever going to be released from jail. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours before coming back with their verdict. Aaron Campbell was found guilty of the abduction, rape, and murder of 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail. The evidence against him being overwhelming, and the judge said that Aaron had committed, and I quote, some of the most wicked and evil crimes this court has ever heard of in decades of dealing with depravity. The judge added, quote, I have no idea why you did this. I do know that the evidence against you was overwhelming. Aaron had no emotional response when being read his guilty verdict, except for the fact that he turned and grinned at Jeannie, Alesha's mother, and Alesha's family while they sat. And it makes me fucking crazy. Apparently, Jeannie, lost it. And when he did that, when he turned, she, stood up and she started screaming at him and she called him, a vile, disgusting rat. And she said that if she didn't have her daughter with her, she would have done a lot more than yelled. And other members of her family essentially told him that he needed to watch his back. She also said that she wished Aaron had been put to death. And she said that she herself wishes that she was dead too, that she wants to be with her daughter, but that her young daughter, Courtney, is what keeps her going. She said of Aaron's sentence, and I quote, he doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as my family. I never imagined that I would ever be in any situation like this. Someone has killed my baby. It rubs salt into our wounds, the fact that he is still alive and she isn't. It shouldn't be like that. Alesha's grandparents, Caleb and Angela, made a victim impact statement saying, and I quote, we are utterly devastated. Alesha was a beautiful, smart, funny, and kind girl. We are traumatized. We do not see how we can live a normal life. Her future was taken, and so was ours. Jeannie also released a statement after the verdict was read that said, in part, and I quote, words cannot express just how devastated I am to have lost my beautiful, happy, smiling, wee girl. I'm glad that boy who did this has finally been brought to justice and that he will not be able to inflict the pain on another family that he has done to mine. Alesha, I love you so much, my wee pal. I will miss you forever. That line got me a little bit. Oh man, in my feels. Get it together, get it together. She also said that she planned to visit Aaron in jail because she said that through the trial it was very clear that it was Aaron who did this, but he pled not guilty and he denied it through the whole trial, so she didn't know why. Why did he kill her daughter? She essentially said that she has questions that only he has the answers to. But Jeannie was not going to have to visit Aaron in prison to get the answers she wanted, because a month later, Aaron came to have his sentence read to him. So he was found guilty. A month later, he was going to be sentenced. And it was at this time that it was revealed that Aaron had changed his tune. He was no longer saying that he was innocent. He had actually admitted to the crime in great detail. He had been interviewed by a forensic psychologist after he was found guilty, and he told this forensic psychologist that he was, quote, quite satisfied with the murder, and that during the trial it took everything in him not to laugh, and that he had to zip his mouth. This makes me crazy. Aaron went on to say that he, quote, continued to experience thoughts of killing and having sex with children and having sex with dead bodies, end quote. The judge described the teenager as a cold, calculating, remorseless, and dangerous individual completely lacking in victim empathy before handing him down a life sentence with a minimum term of 27 years. The judge added that if Aaron had been an adult, his sentence would have definitely been longer, but that typically they aim to rehabilitate young offenders, but that he didn't really believe that rehabilitation was going to be possible for Aaron if he was honest. Alesha's mother said that her world has been ripped apart by what Aaron has done, and that she continues to have nightmares over what he did to her child. And she said of his sentencing, and I quote, a life sentence should be a life sentence. He should have no human rights, and he doesn't deserve anything because he is inhuman. So, later that same year in 2019, Aaron appealed his sentence, saying that the amount of time he was given as a minimum was excessive. And this appeal was successful. 3 different judges agreed that this kid's minimum sentence was excessive. I can't. They didn't dispute that he should never be released, but shortened his minimum sentence from 27 to 24 years, which means he will be able to apply for parole when he is 40 years old. Okay, that seems incredibly low to me, considering what this kid did. But apparently, from what I read, at the time at least, this was the longest sentence that was ever given to a minor. And since this wasn't that long ago, it might still, to this day, be the longest sentence that was ever given to a minor in Scotland. But for clarity, that's not when he's going to be released. That's when he can apply for parole. There's still a chance that he won't be released, but I don't know, man. I really hope he's not. That might sound fucked up, but I don't care, because what he did is so horrible and for literally no reason, and that shit is terrifying to me. And I'm clearly not the only one who feels this way, because a psychologist testified about this, about Aaron's rehabilitation. His name was Dr. Gary something. We'll call him Dr. Gary. And he said of Aaron's potential rehabilitation, and I quote, "I am of the view that the capacity for change may be limited due to the nature of Aaron Campbell's personality structure and his complex risk factors. I apologize to the court for appearing pessimistic. However, I am not confident that Aaron Campbell has the capacity or desire to change his behavior in any meaningful way. And as such, the risks will remain for the foreseeable future." Alesha's family was so upset by this. Her uncle was outraged. He said of Aaron's successful appeal, and I quote, "I am angry, upset, done with it. I'm angry at the decision. He should be tried like an adult. He doesn't deserve to have been given any less or even an appeal." This case got a lot of people in Scotland talking, man. It got people having debates about like the media's influence on youths and how it can make them violent, and how video games and smoking weed could have contributed to what happened. And it also got people talking about minimum sentences for minors and whether or not minors should be tried as adults, because apparently in Scotland they never try juveniles as adults, where in America we do that, which it makes more sense not to try juveniles as adults because they're not technically adults. But at least in America, maybe we should, I don't know, reevaluate the way that we sentence minors, because they're very, very low. So maybe instead of trying them as adults, we just change like the minimums for minors. But anyway, in Scotland, they looked at this case and they were like, bro, not just the intensity of what he did, the callousness of what he did, how horrible that crime was, but also the way he acted in court, the way he didn't give a fuck about what he had done, that he was pleased by it, satisfied with the murder, the fact that he tried to blame Tony, an innocent woman, for this murder. It made people in Scotland be like, fuck, maybe we should be trying juveniles as adults, because this guy, like, fuck this guy. And in addition to talking about that, people in Scotland started having a debate about whether or not children should be tested early for traits of psychopathy. A doctor who assessed Aaron after his conviction argued that young children should be tested for psychopathic traits so that interventions can start early. He said that the opportunity to detect these things early in children is being missed because of the fear of stigma the child may feel. He said, quote, "You don't become a psychopath on your 16th birthday." And he said that he was speaking out now, even though he had felt like this a while, because he didn't want nothing good to come from Alesha's death. And I don't know how I feel about this. I don't really see how it could be a bad thing. I guess it depends on what types of tests are done. I guess there's that stigma thing, but I think maybe the stigma of a few kids could be worth catching these traits early to possibly save other kids in the future. But I'm just really not sure. I don't understand enough of the science behind it and the way the brain works to know if that could be a good thing or a bad thing. But there's so many times that we see these early warning signs that could have been caught, could have been treated, and they're not. So it's kind of like, what is the right thing to do here? There is a group in Glasgow, I believe it is, that's working on this, though. It's a group that goes by the acronym IVY, and it stands for the Interventions for Vulnerable Youth Project. And they work with young people who present a serious risk to harm others. It's funded by the Scottish Government and provides treatments and recommendations for ongoing risk management. There's a team there of health and social work specialists who have supported more than 200 12 to 18-year-olds to date, many of whom have already perpetrated very serious crimes or have made very explicit their plans to do so. But the key for this plan, this group to be effective, is that the kid who's put into the program has to be willing and able to engage and try to get better. So they have to want to be there. So I don't know how effective this could really be. Now, why did Aaron do this? I don't know. Nobody really knows. I did read a really good article written by a woman named Libby Brooks, who was actually present during Aaron's trial. And she said of Aaron and his apparent unknown motive, and I quote, "Naming Campbell did not reveal a monster, but an ordinary boy bouncing on a trampoline, adopting an awkward American accent for his YouTube channel. Whatever Campbell is, and I do not have the training to begin to speculate, he was hiding in plain sight. And perhaps this is the most obscene conclusion of all, that there is nothing to understand. The most obscene conclusion of all was that there was nothing to understand. I think that line, first off, beautifully written. And I think it completely illustrates this properly. He just did it because he wanted to. He wanted to kill somebody, so he killed somebody. He didn't care. He didn't have feelings about it. He showed no emotions, and he felt happy to have done it. He was seemingly normal besides the fire thing. He went to school. He worked out. He made YouTube videos where he streamed video games, and he did parkour on his trampoline. And then one day, he picked up a child, he raped her, and he murdered her. That's terrifying. After her death, there were several tributes put up in Alesha's honor, ways for her family, her community to remember her, and most notable of these tributes were 2 benches. I initially thought there was only 1 bench in her honor. You'll see why when I start describing them, but there were actually 2 put up in her honor. In May of 2019, a pink memorial bench was unveiled on the Rothsay Promenade. The bench is pink and sparkly. It has a plaque with unicorns and the words, "In loving memory of Alesha MacPhail, 10/22/2011 to 7/2/2018, donated by caring people far and wide." It has her name in little colored letters on the sides and on the front, and it's covered with flowers, stuffed animals, and seashells. It was unveiled by her father while he was surrounded by balloons and bubbles from a nearby bubble machine, because again, Alesha loved that. And it's a place where friends, family, anyone who wants to remember Alesha can go and sit and remember her. Shortly after this, another pink bench was unveiled in her honor. You can understand my confusion with 2 separate pink benches. I only saw that there was a difference when I looked up photos. And this one was presented by her mother in Airdrie Park. It says her name, Alesha, with a butterfly on either side of her name and on the sides, with a golden plaque that reads, quote, "In memory of Alesha Sarah MacPhail, 10/22/2011 to 7/2/2018. Sleep tight princess. Love Mummy, George, and Courtney." In addition to the benches, a large wooden playhouse inspired by Alesha's classmates' memories of Alesha was decorated with their pictures of unicorns and butterflies and was built in the school play yard. It's supposed to be a lasting tribute to the child with the infectious smile. This was meant to be a place for any of the children of her school to go, to have a meeting place where they could make friends and have a chat like she loved to do. Her head teacher said that she was confident that this would have won Alesha's, quote, seal of approval. And it's meant to be a place for her friends and future children can go, have a giggle, play with slime, read their books, just be a kid. On the year anniversary of Alesha's death, her school, her classmates put on an assembly for her. Her family was present, and the kids of the school, break my heart, they sang her favorite song, which was Light of Mine. They also had a pin made for the occasion that they wore on their clothes. It was like a pink sparkly heart, and in the center of the heart there was a unicorn that had rainbow hair. And it's something that Alesha would have loved, because Alesha loved unicorns, because she was a 6-year-old baby girl. And with that said, that is the story of the murder of 6-year-old Alesha MacPhail. I know that's like a hard one, so let's take that all famous collective breath, because truly, what the fuck? I talk about a true crime case here, a horrible story here every single week. I look into a horrible story almost every single day, whether it be for work or in my free time. That's just what I'm interested in. But still, sometimes I'm taken aback by how evil people can be. And with Aaron specifically, to be so evil, to have so much evil in you at such a young age, and to just do it on a whim, at a moment of opportunity, not even to have planned it, and then to have no remorse after the fact. That doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't compute in my brain. How do you look into the eyes of a baby that you're hurting and continue to hurt them and not care after the fact? It makes no sense to me. It's just so far removed from something I can understand, which again, I think is a good thing. But now that I've given you all of the information, now that you've heard all of the details of this case, I'm going to ask you the question of the day, and that is this. Do you think that Aaron Campbell got an appropriate sentence for what he did? And just for good measure, I'm actually curious as to whether or not you think, if he is released, if he will reoffend. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all of the information you could want when looking into this case. And of course, I want to thank you for remembering Alesha with me today. She was such a beautiful young girl who had her full life ahead of her. She had an entire ass future, all these things to do and accomplish and experience, and her family deserved to witness that. It is so tragic that something like this can and does happen. That this kind of thing happens. That her family has to live without her and has to live knowing what happened to her. And then this guy could be paroled when he's 40. Her parents are barely older than him. You know what? I would hate to be Aaron if he is paroled anywhere near her mom or her dad. That's all I'm going to say about that. Today we're going to be discussing the horrible murders of 13-year-old Stoni Blair and 9-year-old Stephen Berry. I'm going to tell you the entire story. I did all the research so you don't have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer a question of the day, but I want you to wait till the end so you can hear everything that I say and then answer a question of the day. And that is this. Do you believe Michelle's reason, the justification that she gave for murdering her 2 children? Do you believe that what she says happened is true, or do you believe that she is full of shit? Let me know down below at the end of this video. So now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of Michelle Blair, a monster mother and her house of horrors. And I want to start this video off, as I sometimes do, with a quote. I'm actually going to start it off with 2 quotes. The first one is going to be from the judge who eventually ended up sentencing Michelle. She said of Michelle's heinous crimes, and I'm warning you now, this one's really messed up, so just know that going into it. But she said of Michelle's crimes, and I quote, "One thing that strikes me as the greatest tragedy here is that they will never know what a life is like without experiencing fearing their mother. They will never know the joy of what could have been in their life without having you in it. They lived in terrible fear of you, and I find that just so sad in this case. After all is said and done, you impose the death penalty on your own children." And now a quote from the woman herself, from Michelle Blair. And this is Michelle referencing her 13-year-old daughter, Stoni. Okay? She said of her 13-year-old child, and I quote, "I definitely meant to kill her. If I had a chance to do it again, I would." On March 24th, 2015, on the east side of Detroit, townhouse number 804 at the Martin Luther King Apartments was served with an eviction notice. The renter, who had been living in the low-income townhouse for at least 10 years, had been really struggling on paying rent. She couldn't seem to hold down a job, and she had tried to get help from family members, but they had kind of gotten to the point where they were like, "We need to stop enabling you," and told her, like, "No, I can't help you financially anymore. You need to get a job. You need to go back to school. You need to get it together, guy." But she didn't. And at this point, she was behind over $2,000 in her rent. She had dropped out of high school in the 10th grade when she got pregnant with her first child, a daughter, and because of her limited education, she found that jobs were a little bit harder to come by. She had worked in a bar for a short period of time, but that didn't really work, so she ended up just being a stay-at-home mom, which is a hard job in itself, don't get me wrong, but she didn't have really any income coming in except for $700 a month that she was getting in governmental assistance for her 4 children. So when representatives came over to her apartment to perform the eviction and they knocked on the door, she didn't answer. Michelle and none of her children were home at that time, so they let themselves in because that's how evictions work. You go in and you just move the people out. Like, I don't know how eviction processes work in other states, but in California, you get a lot of notice before this happens, but either way, they go in and they find a completely trashed apartment. Apparently there was garbage, food, stuff everywhere. It was described as unlivable. So they were inside the apartment and they started moving stuff around, and this is when they came upon a deep freeze. You know, the type that is like a big square and it opens from the top and it's like really deep? A deep freeze? Okay, so they find this, and normally that wouldn't be strange, but they found it in the living room, and that is a bit odd. But it wasn't as odd as things were going to get. Odd really isn't the right word. The right word is fucked, honestly. It was about 11:30 in the morning. Like, it wasn't even noon yet when this is happening, and they go to move this deep freeze. And when they go to move it, they realize, like, this is way too heavy for us to actually lift and move it. So they decide they're going to open it and empty out what's inside so that they can then move it all out in pieces. And that's when they made the most horrible discovery that I think anybody could ever make. They open the freezer, and inside they find the body of a young teenage girl. She had a piece of black fabric wrapped around her neck, and she was completely like frozen, like to the freezer. She'd clearly been in there a while. And she was so unrecognizable that they actually thought they were looking at the body of like a 45 or 50-year-old woman and not a child, which it did turn out to be a child. So naturally police were called, and when police came and they started processing the scene, they started looking around, they made another just horrible discovery, as if what I'm telling you right now hasn't been horrible enough. As they're trying to like look inside the freezer further, kind of move the girl, which they had a lot of trouble with, but as they're looking in the freezer further, they find that she's not alone in there. They find that below her, she's on top of another body, and the body below her is that of a young boy wrapped in a blanket. Now, while this is happening, one of the neighbors had, taken notice to what's going on, because, nosy neighbors. And they let police know that the occupant of the home, a 35-year-old mother of 4 named Michelle Blair, is actually just like right next door at a neighbor's house. I believe this neighbor was one of Michelle's relatives, and it's reported that at the time that this happened, Michelle was babysitting someone else's kids, which is just like, I can't even imagine. But when police go, they do find that Michelle is there, and she's there with 2 of her children, but there are 2 of her children missing. This is 9-year-old Stephen and 13-year-old Stoni that are not with Michelle. So police go to Michelle and they start talking to her, and initially they're just talking to her as like a person of interest, but it didn't take long of them questioning her for them to realize like, damn, shit's really fucked up here. So they, take her downtown, as they say. And as police are leading her away, she just simply says to one of her neighbors, "I'm sorry." Later that day, many neighbors gathered in like a common area, grassy space to speak about their frustrations with the tragedy. Because even though the kids hadn't been identified yet, it is still fucking kids found in a freezer. That's an upsetting thing. And one of the women who was there, a woman in her 50s named Yvette, said of this tragedy, and I quote, "We lost 2 of our beautiful children down here in the Martin Luther King apartments because we don't want to pay attention or be nosy. This is a message I have for other communities. Be nosy, pay attention, they're children." To which I say, yes. So naturally, police believe that the bodies in the freezer are that of Michelle's 2 unaccounted for children, because honestly, who else could it be? What are the odds that it's any other kids, right? But they have to confirm this. So they take the kids to the morgue. Well, not even just the kids. They take the entire freezer, the entire deep freeze, to the morgue, because the kids are frozen to the freezer. So they have to wait for them to like thaw a bit so that they can take them out. And they do that, and it takes 3 whole days for the bodies to be thawed out enough for autopsies to be performed. 3 days before their identities could be confirmed. But once the autopsies were conducted, it was determined and the kids were positively identified as 9-year-old Stephen Gage Berry and 13-year-old Stoni Ann Blair. And though the exact time of death could not be determined, it appeared that the 2 had been in the freezer at least a couple of years. And the county medical examiner said that the children had died from, quote, multiple blunt force trauma, but that Stephen also had thermal injuries listed as a cause of death. And I can only imagine that that might mean that he was still alive when he was put in the freezer, which is just like too much to think about. But actually, now that I'm thinking about his injuries, which we are going to get into, that could have been from something else as well. But again, we're going to get into that a little bit later. A neighbor named Tori said of the murders and of the children, and I quote, "This is so tragic. They were the nicest kids, so respectable." And another kid, a neighbor who was 10 years old, I believe, and his name was Eli, he was friends with Stephen. And when he learned what had happened to his friend, another actual child, he was shocked. Like, how could he not be? How could a 10-year-old not be shocked to learn that one of their friends had been killed, right? He says that he was told that Stephen had gone to Georgia to like live with family, and that Stephen's mother, Michelle, was such a nice lady and gave him a hug every day. Others said that Michelle was a fine woman, a kind woman, one woman calling her a beautiful spirit. She gave the impression that Michelle was just trying to be a good person and get by with her kids. And Michelle's brother Marlon, who lived in California at the time of the murders, at the time that he gave this quote, he said he was still just processing the news, and he said specifically, and I quote, "It's too early to even say what this could be or make any judgments. She didn't have any emotional problems from what I'm aware of. I don't know what to say about all this." She didn't have any emotional problems that he's aware of. Let's remember that going forward. So now when Michelle was taken downtown and she was questioned, interrogated, the entire thing was recorded, and that's the video that I watched on YouTube that Christy sent me. And what she says and the way she says it is just so crazy. Considering what she's there talking about, you would think that she cared more, but she really only seemed to be concerned about talking to her aunt and getting a message to her aunt to let her aunt know that she still loved her and that she wasn't mad at her. And I just found that to be a really odd point because she seemed to care about that more than anything else she was discussing. She was asked by the investigator how many kids she has, and she said 2, that she used to have 4. And that note really stuck with me because it just seemed so incredibly heartless. And then she just started casually confessing. She had no problem saying everything that she did. And she started with telling the investigator what happened to 9-year-old Stephen, because apparently he was killed first. So this is the point where I want to let you know that things are going to take a hard, sharp turn into really fucked up territory. This is a really, really rough case, so just know that going into it. So Michelle Tales tells the investigator that in August of 2012, and keep in mind, the kids weren't found until 2015, okay? So in August of 2012, she came home to find her youngest child, who was 8 years old at the time that she was arrested, so he must have been like 5 or 6 in 2012. She says that she came home to find him simulating sexual activities with his dolls. So immediately when she sees her young son doing this, she freaks out, as anybody would, and she's like, who did this? Why are you doing that? Why are you doing that with your dolls? Who showed you this? Has anyone ever done this to you? And she says that her young son responded with, yes, my brother Stephen has. Now, Michelle says that the first thing that she does in this scenario, well, she says 2 different things. First, she says she immediately confronts Stephen, but then when she's in court, she says that she actually called police right away once she was told this by her youngest son. And that she asked the police, she called the police and asked, like, what would happen in the scenario where one brother was raping his little brother? Like, what would happen when they take both kids out of the house? What would be the situation? And she says that police told her that, yes, both boys would likely be taken out of the house, and that they asked her, like, is this happening in your home? And she said, no, she was calling for a friend. Which, that's a whole nother thing. Like, the police should have definitely, if this call happened, the police definitely should have done something at that point, that time, right then and there. But apparently she says that police just told her to call CPS to get more information, but that yes, an investigation would have to be done into the household, and during the investigation, both boys would be taken out of the house. She says at this point she goes to confront him, and he denies it. So at that point, she just started beating him, that she punched him over and over and over, that she tortured him, right? She tortured him until finally he admitted to it. He admitted to hurting his brother. He admitted to the sexual assault, and that he admitted that in the night he would get up and instead of going to the bathroom, he would pee on his little brother instead. And from there, she was filled with rage, and she tortured this 9-year-old for 1 or 2 weeks, beating him, punching him, kicking him, making him drink Windex, putting him in the shower with water so hot that it broke the skin on his feet and the lower half of his body. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, his skin came off. Over the 2 weeks that she did this, she says that she stayed pretty drunk on vodka while she would assault him. She even went as far as to cutting off his air supply on 2 different occasions, once by putting a bag over his head until he passed out, and once by strangling him by lifting him off the ground with a belt until he passed out. And she, while confessing, she told the investigator that she didn't feel bad recounting this, like it didn't make her feel bad when she was retelling the story, but that she knew that doing it was evil and knew that she was evil. She tells the investigator that finally, after a period of 2 weeks or so, his body could no longer take the abuse, and that he had like labored breathing that sounded like wheezing or panting, and that he needed to throw up, he needed to go to the bathroom, but he couldn't physically do it. And she said that she tried to perform CPR on him, but it didn't work. And she was particularly triggered in this memory because she said that she could smell like beef stew on his breath that she had given him the night before. She says that he had asked her for pizza and that she had told him no. And that note just stuck out to me because she couldn't even like give this kid like a last meal of sorts, you know? It's just... Stephen died as a result of his numerous injuries on August 30th, 2012. After he died, she sat on the ground against the wall and just stared at him. His mother then went and wrapped him in his favorite Paul Frank monkey blanket and placed his body in the deep freeze in her living room. She claims that she didn't mean to kill Stephen, that she did mean to hurt him, that she meant to severely hurt him as a punishment for what she says he had done, but that his death was ultimately an accident. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, "If I had killed Stephen intentionally, I would definitely be proud to say I did, but I didn't." Proud. This woman is disgusting. Michelle says that after Stephen was killed, she did plan to turn herself in. She said she even called her Aunt Angela, who was a Detroit police child abuse investigator, might I add, but that when she called her, she just couldn't do it. She just couldn't admit it. Didn't stop her from collecting the money that she got, like from the government, for her deceased child now, but that's neither here nor there. But she says that when she called her aunt, she just said to her instead, like, "If anything was to happen, would you take care of the kids for me?" And her aunt was like, "Bro, you got to get it together. You always lean on me." From here, 9 months went by. 9 months went by with Stephen's body in the freezer in the living room. And that's just so crazy to me, especially because, like, yes, she had her youngest son, but Stoni was 13. And her other daughter was even older than Stoni. So these older kids are living in this house with their brother's body in the freezer. And we find out later that, yes, they knew he was there. So it's just absolutely crazy to consider. But now we move on to Stoni. Speaking of Stoni, she was the next to be killed. And Michelle says that 9 months after finding out that Stephen had been abusing her youngest son, she then learned that Stoni had also been abusing her youngest son. She says that her youngest told her that Stoni had been abusing him and had been abusing Stephen when Stephen was alive. And she says at this point that she had lost it, that she couldn't believe that her older daughter could have done what she had done, that she could sit there and watch her abuse Stephen to the point that he died and not say anything, not admit to what she had done, and then to have gone on to continue abusing her youngest son, even in the wake of learning what her mother was capable of. And she says at this point, she just completely lost it on Stoni, and that Stephen's death was an accident, but that Stoni's death was on purpose. Michelle says that she goes and she confronts Stoni, and that she does admit it eventually, but that's after she's been tortured by her mother, that she admits that yes, she had sexually abused both boys, and she did it because she hated them. And when Michelle asks, like, why would Stephen not tell me this while I'm torturing him for weeks on end? Why would he not tell me what you had done? And she said that in the periods of time that she said that Stoni said, that in the periods of time where Michelle would like take a break from abusing Stephen, Stoni would then go in and abuse Stephen and say that she would kill him if he was to tell their mom what Stoni had been doing. And she says that Stoni admitted that she would sexually abuse Stephen, and then the two of them at the same time would then go and abuse her youngest son. And from there, from that realization, Michelle went on to torture Stoni, prolonged torture. She would beat her. She would choke her with a t-shirt. She would starve her. She would suffocate her with a plastic bag and throw scalding water on her. She would beat her over the head with a thick wooden stick, saying that she made, quote, little lumps everywhere, but that Stoni was still alive. And she says that each day she says she learned more and more information from her youngest son, and as she did, she would drink more alcohol and she would beat Stoni worse and worse. She says that her youngest would give her more and more details over the days of what Stoni did, how Stoni raped him, and that, this is so gross. She says that her youngest even said that Stoni would take out her menstrual pad and like squeeze the blood into his mouth, which that's just fucking extreme. Like all of this is this case is so hard and it's so just gross. It's a lot. I know it's a lot. I'm aware of how much this is. I almost didn't even cover it, but I feel like it needs to be. I've never heard anyone talk about this, and I feel like it's crazy because it's such an intense case. And she says that she continued to abuse and torture Stoni until eventually her body too gave out. And this was, well, her body didn't give out. She was killed on May 25th, 2013. Michelle says that on this day, Stoni had been sleeping on the floor when she woke up to her mother standing directly above her with the two of them face to face. And Michelle says that she then asked Stoni, like, are you ready to apologize to your brother? And she says that Stoni apologized for abusing someone in that way in general, but didn't specifically apologized for abusing her brother, and this did not please Michelle. She's like, oh, you're sorry for doing this to someone, but not sorry for doing this to your brother specifically. She says that she started punching Stoni, and that this time, for the first time ever, Stoni actually punched her back, and apparently immediately regretted it and apologized and said that it was a reflex and she didn't mean to do it. And what's really fucked up here, this note just bothered me, is she says that Stoni always had trouble standing up for herself in general, like as a 13-year-old in life, she had trouble asserting herself, and that when Stoni hit her back, she was strangely proud of her. And that note just really upset me. And she says from there, I can only imagine a woman this abusive, your kid hits you back, how pissed she would be. She says that she grabbed a t-shirt, the black shirt that was found around Stoni's neck when she was found in the freezer, and she tied it around her neck to strangle her, and then put a bag over her face and smothered her to death. The medical examiner later said of Stoni's injuries, and I quote, "She had multiple blows to the head. The entire scalp was suffused with hemorrhage, which meant that she had received numerous impacts over the head. She had every body surface covered with something. Wherever you looked, there was either a scar or an ulceration." When Michelle tortured her kids, it wasn't just physical abuse, it was also psychological torture. She would go from periods of time where she would relentlessly beat them, starve them, maybe feeding them once a day, to being calm, talking to them, feeding them. They never knew what version of their mother they were going to get that day, because she yo-yoed so hard from aggressively abusing them to acting like a normal person. A normal person doesn't do what she did. And I can't even imagine how terrifying this was for those kids. After Stoni was killed, her body was then placed in the freezer on top of Stephen's, but it wasn't Michelle who put Stoni in the freezer. Michelle made her eldest daughter do it. And that note just destroys me. I can't even imagine what it was like to be these kids in this house, dude. I hate this woman. But she was later interviewed. Michelle was interviewed, and she was asked, like, why did you put Stoni on top of Stephen like that? Like, how could you do something like that? And she responded, quote, "I only had one deep freezer. Where was she gonna go?" She's just so evil. It's so fucked up, dude. On top of making her eldest child put her dead sibling on top of her other dead sibling, she then made her youngest and her eldest look in the freezer at their dead brother and sister. And then kept the freezer in the living room, in like the main part of the house, as a constant reminder to those kids of what she had done, what she was capable of, and what she could then go on to do to them. And apparently when she showed them their bodies, the two just cried. Michelle's aunt Angela, the aunt that Michelle was so concerned with speaking with during her interrogation, a woman that we're going to talk more about at length a little bit later because I do have some thoughts, she said of Michelle's surviving children, and I quote, "Pray for those children. They saw things that nobody should ever have to see. I have no idea what it was like for them to live with those bodies all that time. I can't even imagine." Now, Michelle says that when she showed her children the bodies of their dead siblings, that her youngest son, the one who she says was being abused the whole time, had said that he didn't cry, that he said that she had saved him. Now, this is what she says that he said, but I do not believe it's true, because later there's a hearing where Michelle's actually trying to retain guardianship of her two surviving children. Why? Who the fuck knows? We'll get more into that again later. But during this hearing, her youngest contradicts the statement that his mother saved him. And he instead talks at length about how he was also aggressively physically abused by his mother, okay, Michelle, and that he thinks she deserves to go to jail, and that he saw her murder his siblings. This woman is just plain evil. She murdered two of her children, dude, and then psychologically tortured her surviving kids by letting them see their dead siblings' bodies and then keeping them in the freezer as a constant reminder of what she was capable of. And these are the kids that she, quote, loved enough to get their names tattooed on her arm. The kids who now, two of them, she doesn't even claim anymore. She says that Stephen and Stoni are no longer her kids. And she said specifically of Stephen and Stoni, and I quote, "I have two children. That's it. Stephen and Stoni are demons. Period." The Friday after the two children's bodies were found, a candlelight vigil was held in their honor, and many people, including friends, family members, and even governmental officials, came and stood outside the townhouse where the kids had lived and died. The porch was covered in candles and stuffed animals and balloons, and at one point during the vigil, the people who were there released balloons into the sky, yelling that they love Stoni and that they love Stephen into the air. People present saw this crime as a sign that they needed to solidify their community because it, takes a village, and that this was a sign that they just needed to start paying attention, getting to know each other's neighbors, and to just really start focusing, because how did people go this long without even noticing that these kids were gone? But this happens a lot, right? Like, this wasn't even the first murder that happened in these apartment complex, like the apartment complex that Michelle lived in. Just a couple of years before, in 2012, another woman, a woman named Samiah Green, I believe is what her name was, she stabbed her daughter to death. I believe her daughter was only 8 years old, and she stabbed her to death in these apartments as well. And on top of that, in an interview with Michelle's Aunt Angela, she even said that she wasn't sure if Michelle was given a psychological evaluation after the initial reports of abuse had come out, because we're going to get into it in a little bit, but there were reports of abuse from, like, Michelle abusing her kids in the early 2000s. And Michelle's aunt said specifically that, quote, they don't always do those when there are signs of abuse, the psychological evaluations, and that if they did, half the people in Detroit would be having evaluations. This woman saying that half of Detroit would be evaluated if people had to be evaluated if there were signs of child abuse. And that's just so scary. And she worked as a police officer, like in the police department, investigating child abuse. So she knows what she's talking about, at least to a point. So there was no village for these kids, these two kids that were murdered and then kept in a freezer for years. Nobody reported them missing. Nobody said or did anything. Nobody even noticed. Michelle even went into the kids' school and pulled them out of school. Not even just the two, not even just Stoni and Stephen. She pulled all 4 of her kids out of school, telling the school that she was moving, but telling other people that she was homeschooling them, even though she herself had dropped out of school in the 10th grade and really didn't have the education to homeschool her kids, right? And there was no follow-up on this. There is no requirement for parents to notify the school district that they're homeschooling, even though it is, quote, encouraged. The only time any sort of like registration was required is if a parent's requesting special education assistance. There was nothing at all in effect statewide that alerts anyone in any sort of position in power if kids are removed from the school system, which is crazy to me, because I remember growing up thinking that, like, my mom was going to go to jail if I ditched. You know what I mean? Like the truancy thing. I thought that was such a thing, but maybe it's state by state. I don't know. It's just, that blows my mind a little bit. Like, you could just pull them out and everyone's like, well, deuces, kids, like, good luck. And apparently anytime anyone would ask Michelle, like, where's Stoni? Where's Stephen? She would say they weren't home. They were at their friend's house. They were at an aunt's house. Anywhere but here. Anywhere but the freezer. But even though, like, Michelle tried to hide what she did, right? She tried to hide it from people. She lied about where the kids were. She didn't really make any attempt to try to conceal what she did when she knew she was getting evicted. You know what I mean? Like, maybe she couldn't physically move the freezer herself. Maybe she probably couldn't afford to hire somebody to move it, but she didn't really do anything to try to conceal the fact that there were bodies in the freezer. You know what I mean? And it's just wild to me, because I don't know how evictions work in Detroit, but in California, it takes 3 to 4 months for an eviction to go through. And when the eviction's going through, you get like a last notice from the sheriff, like days, at least 5 days before the eviction's going to take place. So like put a notice on your door like, hey, last chance, you better get out or we're going to remove you. And Michelle clearly knew that the eviction was coming, because the day of it, she told one of her neighbors, like, oh, well, they're coming. There's dumpsters out front. Like, shit's about to go down. And she was talking to her neighbor. I believe her name was Miss Carrie. And she even said, like, she clearly knew that something was up. Maybe she wanted to get caught, because she told Miss Carrie specifically, and I quote, Miss Carrie, if you don't ever see me again, just know that I love you. And this woman, Miss Carrie, was clearly her friend and had been her friend a while, and said, like, okay, I'm at work now, but when I get off work, I'll come and help you with this whole eviction business. And they were friends. Like, Miss Carrie said that she had even been in her house, like, the week before, and she said she had been there for a barbecue, and she noticed the deep freeze in the living room, because it's in the living room, and that's odd, but that she didn't think much of it, because, like, everyone has a deep freeze. She herself had a deep freeze. And it's just very eerie to now know the kids had been in there all this time. So Michelle was arrested, and she was initially held on a $1 million bond, but this is when she was just being charged with child abuse and wasn't yet being charged with the murders. Michelle, who appeared at this hearing by video call, showed little emotion, and she actually tried leaving the hearing early and had to be called back to finish. She was also ordered that she wasn't allowed to have any contact with neighbors at the apartment complex where she lived or with any of her surviving children. Initially, Michelle was charged with 4 counts of first-degree child abuse and 1 count of committing first-degree child abuse in the presence of a minor. And the court ended up entering a plea of not guilty on her behalf. But eventually, she did get many more charges tacked on with that. And in the end, I think she had like 17 different charges against her. These charges included felony murder, first-degree premeditated murder, torture, and the first-degree child abuse charge, and at this point, she was held without bond. So once Michelle was arrested and her 2 surviving children were out of her grasp, they were able to be interviewed, and they were interviewed by a company called Kids Talk, which is a child advocacy group that was like hired on by the county. And in speaking to the kids and being able to like actually get information from them, they were able to find out what really went on in that house with Michelle. Because Michelle would lead you to believe that she was a good mother, just trying her best, and that these instances of abuse with Stoni and Steven were outliers, that they were freak occurrences. But in talking to the kids, they found that this clearly wasn't the case. All of these kids were abused for years, dude. On the day that Steven and Stoni were found, the 2 surviving children were given medical examinations, and they were found to both be covered in scars. The 8-year-old boy, the youngest, had, quote, 25 scars and injuries, both old and new, on his back, as well as, quote, loop-shaped scars and injuries on his back and his buttocks that were consistent with being whipped with an extension cord. During Michelle's oldest daughter, her teenage daughter's examination, they noticed that there was a cut above her left eye, and they asked her how that happened, and she said her mother hit her in the face with a 2x4. And they noticed also that one of her front teeth were broken, and when they asked her how that had happened, she said that her mother had smacked her in the mouth with a curling iron. She also had scars from being burned with irons and whipped with cords, and she said that her mother refused to get her or any of her siblings medical attention, despite this woman having Medicaid for all 4 of her children. She had governmental insurance for all of her kids, but she wasn't getting them assistance because she was the one hurting them. Once Michelle was arrested and this started to come out, people were shocked. Michelle seemed to a lot of people to just be a good mother trying her best. Her brother, as I said, was shocked. Remember, he thought she didn't have any emotional problems. And one of Michelle's old neighbors, it was a friend who had moved out, but after he moved out of the complex, they stayed friends. They talked all the time. I think they talked like once a week. He said that Michelle loved her kids and that she was very overprotective of them and very like defensive of them. Like she was like mama bear type. And he said specifically of her and her kids, quote, "From what I knew, she loved them to damn pieces." That was clearly a very loose quote, but you get what I'm saying. And this neighbor said when he learned what had happened that he was blown away and in complete shock by it. And so was another neighbor named Jessica. Jessica said that Michelle loved her kids, that she homeschooled her kids, and that she was super proud of them, and she would even super glue her kids' assignments and drawings to the living room walls because she was so proud of how well they had done. This neighbor continued saying, quote, "I can't believe it. It's really scary living next to someone that you never really knew." She said that Michelle and her family were very normal looking looking from the outside in, that nobody had any idea. And she said something that just really icked me. And when you hear it, you'll get it. She said, and I quote, "I remember how many times I was in that house leaning on that freezer. I had never seen anything out of the ordinary." Other neighbors just seemed to think that Michelle was totally normal. They would let their kids have slumber parties at her house. But there are contradicting statements when it comes to how people perceived her, and that could be because she was a different person depending on who you talk to, because according to reports from, I believe it's Fox 2 and People.com, 99% sure it was those two publications, if you will, they said that Michelle had openly admitted to several of her neighbors that she had killed her kids, and that nobody said anything, nobody did anything, nobody reported anything. That's to say, at least recently, nobody did anything, nobody said anything, because there were reports of Michelle abusing her kids reported to CPS in 2002 and in 2005. And at that time, CPS did intervene. They came, they looked into the situation, and they substantiated the claims that Michelle was abusing her kids. And they even had her, go into counseling and other services, but she retained custody of the kids. When asked about this, about Michelle, being looked into for child abuse and how she got to keep her kids and all the things that she was supposed to do, the counseling and all of that. One of the representatives, Bob, his name was Bob, he said essentially that he couldn't really say much because of privacy laws, which, okay, sure, but that basically they didn't have any responsibility to follow up further with the family if Michelle completed her programs that she was supposed to. Now, is that to say that she did complete them and that's why they didn't look into it? Or is that to say that he wasn't really sure what he could and could not say at that point? It sounds a lot like passing the buck to me, but that could just be me. He was just essentially like, the cases are closed, and once the cases are closed, we can't do anything. And it just seems like nobody wanted to do anything. I don't know, it just makes me crazy. Like, even the children's great aunt Angela, the one who she wanted to talk to while she was being arrested, she even said that, first off, let me back up. After Michelle got arrested, just so you know, going into this, after Michelle got arrested, her 2 surviving children were sent initially to stay with Aunt Angela, okay? Aunt Angela said that she knew that abuse was going on in that house, but not to that level. I just do not understand why this was able to keep going on. It's so frustrating because, like Angela said that once she told Michelle, like, I have to back up. I'm getting so frustrated. She said that she used to really help Michelle and really help take care of the kids. Like, she had a lot of responsibility in that. She took on a lot of responsibility in that. But that once she told Michelle, like, you need to get it together, you need to get a job, you need to go back to school, you need to do something, that Michelle had cut her off, completely isolated herself from the kids, and just basically cut out all of the extended family. Like, totally. When Angela was asked why she didn't react to the signs of abuse, she said that that was a valid question that she would also ask herself. Now, I'm not usually a judgy fucking bitch, but okay, maybe I am. Well, I'm gonna be right now. What the fuck, Angela? If what I am reading is correct, first off, you worked as a police child abuse investigator, okay? And that you knew that in this home, child abuse was happening, but not to that level. And then Michelle, who's already abusing her kids, cuts off all communication with you. All. Doesn't talk to you, doesn't talk to any of the family, just falls off the planet, and you do nothing, you report nothing. That is your job. And these kids were your family. Inexcusable. And then this is the woman who the court decides that the 2 remaining children should go and stay with while they figure out the custody situation. I would like to know who made that call. Anyway, sorry, I got off on like a big thing there, and I know I must have jumbled over my words and that might have been hard to even follow. I'm just very passionate. When I get passionate or upset, interested, passionate, upset, any of the above, A, B, or C, I start to talk a little bit fast. I start to get a little bit jibber jabbery. I get comments a lot that I talk too fast. It's because I care. But I'm just so pissed off because all of these adults were not doing the best things that they could. They were not being the best versions of themselves. They weren't being as responsible as they should be. And as a result, there's 2 dead children in a freezer. And those stakes are just too high, and that's inexcusable. But I digress. Remember how I said that Michelle had a not guilty plea entered on her behalf? Well, she surprised everybody in court. It seems like she even surprised her own attorney when she decided to turn around and be like, you know what, actually, I've thought this over. I thought it real good. I've been thinking. And I'm not a coward, so I'm actually going to plead guilty, and I will please take the death penalty if it's on the table. In response, Judge King was like, well, I'm going to give you 1 more week to think about it because, like, these are serious charges. And Michelle responded, like, I'm certain in my decision. I don't need another week to think it over. But the judge was firm and didn't let her enter that guilty plea, like, right off the bat. The judge had gotten new information regarding Michelle's, like, psych evaluation and wanted to make sure to look it over before accepting the plea. And Michelle was pissed, saying that she had a big problem with it and thought it was ridiculous, but the judge wanted to ensure that Michelle's rights were protected first in case she did have, like, some sort of mental incapacity. Like, you're not going to let somebody who can't mentally make decisions make such a serious decision. In the end, Michelle's guilty plea was accepted and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite her attorney, I believe, like, really trying to convince her not to enter this plea, because in every article I read, it says that he discussed the plea with her at least 3 times. Like, he's like, listen, I tried. I don't want her coming back later and trying to appeal and saying that, like, I didn't do my job, because I did my job. The bitch wanted to go to jail. And I say the bitch with all disrespect. I did think it was worth mentioning because it really irked me that her attorney did also say that these murders, the torture murders of her children, were an unfortunate situation and that Michelle had been in a difficult situation. And I don't know. That just really, like, bothered me because what the fuck? That's like putting it as lightly as humanly possible. And when I read it, I could not move past it. And so I thought that you should dwell in this anger with me. The judge said to Michelle of her crimes, and I quote, "As a mother, one of your primary responsibilities was to protect your children. And in that respect, you failed in the worst possible way." Michelle did end up losing custody of her 2 surviving children, not custody, but her parental rights. For some reason, she was fighting for this. She thought that people were going to be like, yeah, listen, I know you killed 2 of your kids, but like the other 2, sure, make decisions. Like, no, obviously, bitch, you're not going to get to keep custody of your children. So the court was trying to take away her parental rights and also the parental rights of the 2's biological fathers. They had 2 separate fathers. The son would have been 8 around this time, and the daughter would have been 17. So the boy would have been put up for adoption, and I guess the teenage girl would have kind of been on her own, which is really sad, but like she's about to be an adult. So what else can you do, you know? And during the meantime, the kids were staying with their Aunt Angela, as I said, and the fathers were allowed to have supervised visits while CPS was there, while they were in the process of having custody and their parental rights basically dissolved. So the 2 surviving kids had different fathers. The young boy who survives father was 31 and his name was Stephen, and I believe he was also young Stephen's father. And the teenage girl's father was 35 and his name was Alexander, and apparently he was also Stoni's father. So Papa Stephen was the young surviving boy's dad and Stephen who was murdered's dad, and Papa Alexander was the teenage daughter who survives dad and Stoni's dad. And listen, the 2 surviving kids, I have seen their names in reportings, but in a lot of reportings, they're kept anonymous, likely for good reason, so I'm respectfully not saying their names. So I'm sorry if it gets a little confusing, but like, they're kids, and that's the decision I've made here. Now, Michelle clearly did not like her children's fathers, because when she was brought in the courtroom, she flipped both of them off, and it's probably because of a couple of reasons. I mean, it's very, you know, every relationship is kind of, there's a lot to it, but 1, they owed her like a lot of child support, and 2, neither of them were super present in their kids' lives. I mean, they were both dead in a freezer for years, and the dads didn't know, so I think it's safe to say that they weren't super involved. Alexander, Stoni's father, had lived with Michelle for several years, but he and Michelle had separated after their first daughter was born. Clearly, they were still physical though, because, like, Stoni. He said he hadn't seen Stoni in about 2 years, but that she was, quote, fine the last time he saw her. He basically said that Michelle had told him, like, had forbid him from seeing Stoni, which is a cop-out in my opinion. That's my position. That'll always be my position when it comes to these things. And that anytime he asked where she was, Michelle said she was with a neighbor or with a family member. According to Alexander's sister, Alexander was trying to still be in his daughter's lives, even though the high school relationship had ended, but that Michelle made it very difficult, and that anytime he tried to be around, tried to talk to the kids, tried to engage at all, she made it very difficult for him to do so. Now listen, I don't doubt that that's true. Especially based on who Michelle is as a person, I totally believe that she made his life very, very difficult if he tried to see or talk to the girls, right? But here's the thing. Nothing could stop me from seeing my son if I was in this situation where me and my husband were not together. Nothing. I hate this excuse. I hate this excuse that you hear usually from fathers for not seeing their kids. I hate their baby mama's crazy blah, blah, fucking blah. No, nothing. Nothing can keep me from my son. You've got a crazy ex. You want to see your kid? Go to court. Fight for your kid. It's such bullshit, and this is a hill that I will always die on. I had a really close friend who was dating this guy, and she told me that he had a kid he didn't see, and I was just like, how is this not such a fucking deal breaker? And she said the same thing. His baby's mom is crazy. Every time he talks to her, she makes it difficult for him. Okay, well, he is a deadbeat who doesn't fight to see his kid. And that is the greater evil to me. I feel very strongly about this, not just in this case, just in general. This is a hill that I aggressively die on, so I just want you to know that it's not this case specific. This is just something that I very strongly feel, and I hate that excuse, because it's just bullshit. It's just bullshit. And Michelle's attorney actually echoed my sentiments. He was like, listen, I have a kid. Nothing would stop me from seeing my kid. If you wanted to, you could. And if you were worried and you couldn't get a hold of them, you could always call in a welfare check. You could do something. He said that this wasn't just a case of Michelle not letting these men see their kids, but these men not wanting to actively try to see their kids. Michelle claimed during the hearing that she had read Alexander's family's impact statements and that they were full of lies, that she didn't keep the girls from seeing their father, that they used to go over all the time, and that the only reason the visit stopped is because Alexander's father got caught being inappropriate with another underage female relative, and that on one occasion, the girls, her daughters, woke up to find him laying in their room. And that's why she stopped allowing the girls to go over and see their father, but that he was more than welcome to come over and see them. I'm sure the truth falls somewhere in the middle there. I do think that that little bit of information about the father's father is interesting. I don't know how much I trust what comes out of Michelle's mouth, but it is interesting considering what we're talking about here. Now, for fairness, I will say that I did read that Alexander was unemployed. That's why he owed so much in child support, and that he couldn't even afford bus fare to go and see his girls, and that it was too far to walk. But I just don't know. I don't know. He did also say that he was the one who reported her to CPS, I believe in 2005, because the girls had come to stay with him, and he had noticed whip marks on them, but that he never asked Michelle how they got there because he didn't want to argue. So it's just... everything about this case makes me unhappy, as I'm sure you can imagine. And I do still feel bad for him, don't get me wrong. He still lost his daughter, and I can't imagine how traumatizing that is, especially to know that you didn't try harder to see her, and you did try to call CPS before, and this still happened. And with him in particular, I did read that he didn't even know about his daughter dying until a reporter called him to question him about it, and that's how he learned about it. So that in itself is just devastating as well. Apparently the same reporter did try to call Stephen as well, the boy's father, and the number that he called, whoever answered the phone, hung up immediately when the reporter started talking, and when he called back, they didn't answer. So I don't really know what his situation is. I do know from what I read online, it doesn't appear that he's seen his son since 2012. And like Alexander, he owed Michelle a good amount in child support. I guess he had been making payments, but stopped making payments, and right around the time that all of this happened, he had recently been in and out of jail. That's basically the most I could figure out about him. Actually, there was one more thing about him. He was asked if he felt partially responsible for what happened to Stephen, and he did take ownership of that, and he did say yes, that he felt like he could have done more to protect him, which is something, I guess. And Michelle just, man, she did not like these guys. She yelled at them in court. She screamed at them in court saying, and I quote, "I did it. I never tried to say I didn't. I did it. But that does not negate the fact that they were never there for their children." At the end of this hearing, Alexander did say that he didn't believe his rights should be terminated because he was her father and he didn't do anything wrong. And Stephen declined to comment. But in the end, both Michelle and both fathers did end up losing their parental rights to the remaining children. Now, from what I can read online, it does seem like the two kids are okay. I hope they got the therapy they need. I think they did. What I read, it seems like they got the therapy they needed, because, man, they would really need it. I can't imagine what they went through to be living in that house, to know what your mom had done to your siblings, to have seen it happen, and to just have that freezer in that living room as a constant reminder, and then to have her beating you and just wondering when it was going to be your turn. When were you going to end up being put in the freezer as well? It's just it's a nightmare. It is a nightmare. But the teenage daughter would be an adult now. She was set to graduate in 2017 with plans to go to college, and the young boy had been adopted. I didn't see by who. I know Michelle said that she wanted her Aunt Angela to be the one who adopted him, but I don't know if that's what happened. I just know that, he was adopted and she wasn't, because she was 17, and she ended up being in an independent living home during her transitional period. The judge set up the children in the aftermath of their mother's upbringing, and I quote, "Both children overcame the majority of the setbacks they encountered in this case." So where Michelle's children have been working on improvement since she was arrested, Michelle has not been following suit. Not at all. Since being in jail, she's at least twice been charged with assaulting prison employees. In at least one of these instances, she was accused of throwing her own feces and urine at a corrections officer. I guess she put it in a Pringles can, and when the officer came over to take her food tray, she was just and threw it on them, which is just so gross, dude. Come on. Who does that? We live in a society. Well, she doesn't. She lives in jail. But you know what I mean? Ugh. They also say that she spits at people, assaults people, and threatens to kill people. She kicked a cop in the stomach and in the arm. And in 2019, she had had 49 incidences against her since being in prison. So that would be 49 incidences from 2015 to 2019. And it was so bad that for a long time she was in segregation, but from what I read, she's now in general population. In the general population. Gen Pop. Pop. So this woman is evil, right? She said herself in her interrogation that she is evil. What she did is evil, but there seem to be two different versions of this woman, both in how other people see her and how she perceives herself. First, she says she loves her kids. During her interrogation, she even asked the officers if they could please, like the girl who was interrogating her, if she could get to her kids and to please like give them a hug and tell them that she loved them and not to tell them that she was crying because she didn't want them to worry about her. She also talked about loving her kids on her Facebook page. Michelle's Facebook page said, and I quote, "Loyal to my babies." And she had shared a post that said, quote, "There is no greater blessing than being called a mom." So there's that version of her, which is like a good mother who like loves her kids and talks about them and like puts their work up on the wall at home and protects them. There's that version of her to some people and to her. A version people trusted enough to let her babysit their kids. But then in the same breath, or not the same breath, but then from the same woman, she says that Stephen and Stoni are demons and that yes, she killed them, and yet that yes, she would do it again if she had the chance. And it doesn't seem like her opinion on that has even changed. After being arrested, she did a jailhouse interview with Crime Watch Daily, and she said that she stands by what she initially said. She had not like swayed or felt remorse with time to really sit and think about what she did. And she said, and I quote, "At first I cried, but I would kill them again. There were no other options." Now, why did Michelle do this? This is really the question, right? There's some back and forth on whether or not it's true that Stephen and Stoni were abusing their brother. I know that there was a jailhouse informant that came out, somebody who was in jail with Michelle, who said that Michelle said she made the whole thing up, that she lied about the abuse to get sympathy for what she had done, that it was just chronic abuse that had gone overboard, and then she lied to, get off. But then there was a reporter who was in the court, named Vicky Thomas, I believe, who said that during this hearing there was a recording played from the young boy, and in this recording he did discuss abuse at the hands of his siblings. And this reporter Vicky said specifically, and I quote, "He said his sister Stoni raped him and also made allegations of inappropriate touching by his brother Stephen." And after this reporting was played in court, Michelle looked over at the fathers who were sitting together and just yelled, "See, look what your daughter did to my son." So it does seem like it's possible that the little boy was being abused by his siblings, but I didn't find clarification on exactly how, the specifics. So I can't really tell you that today. Now, I will say this. Is it possible that Stoni and Stephen were abusing their brother? Yes, of course it's possible. But I will say that that's a big if they were abusing their brother, there's a good chance, it's almost a certainty that somebody was doing this to them as well, because they were kids, right? Stoni's 13, Stephen's even younger. So if Stephen and Stoni were doing this to their brother, they got this from somewhere. You know what I mean? They're not just going to wake up one day and do this. Whether it be somebody doing it to Stoni and then her doing it to Stephen and it trickling down from there, I don't know. But this isn't the type of thing that would just pop into a child's head without some sort of reference point. It's just such a fucked up situation all around. Because if they were abusing their brother, they needed help. They needed help. They needed therapy. They needed something. But they did not need or deserve to be beaten and starved and burned and suffocated by their mother. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't have any sympathy for people who sexually abuse or hurt children. But these two were also children. Now, a reason that if this is true, if this did happen, a reason that this could have particularly enraged Michelle is because she has said that she was sexually abused as a child, and that it enraged her in such a way because she knew how her young son had felt, because she had been in that position and had felt that way before. She said that as a kid she had told her mother about the abuse, and that her mom had just been like, "Well, what do you want me to do about it? It's already done. It's already happened." And that her mother stayed friends with this person. This person was a woman, and it was a woman who had abused her and her brother. and that her mother stayed friends with her, so she'd have to see her all the time, still at their house, still socializing, still have to be around this person, and that it made her feel like stupid for even telling her mother and ashamed, and that to this day she doesn't talk to her mother and father. She did say she can't use this as an excuse because she is an adult and she made her choices, but she was using it more of a way to explain, not excuse, her behavior because of what happened to her, she has a serious issue with people abusing kids. And Michelle says that she talked to her kids about this, that she talked to them about what happened to her, who did it, and how it made her feel. And she told them to tell her if anyone was ever to do anything like that to them. She said that she told them that rape is the worst thing you can do to a person, and that that's why she was so rageful, because she had explained so explicitly why this was so bad. So that means to her that Stoni and Stephen knew exactly how bad what they were doing was. And I just don't know, man. I don't know what I think about this case. I mean, I know what I think about certain things, but what I don't know is what really happened here, what really happened in that house. I don't know if Stoni and Stephen really abused their brother. I don't know if they were abused themselves. I don't know if they just admitted this because their mother was literally torturing them. Like, it's so hard to really know the truth. One thing I do know, one thing I do really truly believe is that deep down inside, something that I think is the truth is that Michelle is an evil woman. She's a monster. She is a horrible person who abused her kids, including the child that she was trying to save from Stephen and Stoni for years. She terrorized and tortured all of those children and then murdered 2 of them and then kept them in a public place in the home so that the other kids would be in continued fear for a prolonged period of time, for years. And they had no one in their corner, no one that they could run to, no one that they could turn to, no one to protect them from the one person whose fucking job it was to keep them safe. Their terrorizer, their mother. Anyways, now that I have given you all the information on this case, I want you to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe what Michelle says? Do you believe that Michelle's son was being abused by his 2 older siblings? Or do you believe that this is something that Michelle made up to justify her prolonged, chronic abuse that just went too far? But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and I hope it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for remembering Stephen and Stoni with me today. What happened to those kids is atrocious. It's unthinkable. I do not know how Michelle sleeps at night. I do not know how you can hurt your kids. I don't think I'll ever understand how a person can hurt their children. When I look at my son, literally all I want to do is give him 1 million kisses all over his face. All I want is to do everything in my power to make him as happy as possible and to not make it so he has to heal from any damage I inflict on him, even mentally. You know what I mean? I hate this woman. I hate this woman. And that's really all I have to say. Today we're going to be discussing the horrific murder of 14-year-old Grace Packer. I feel like, okay, this case is so bad. I feel like I've gotten pretty good at compartmentalizing when it comes to doing this sort of thing, talking about this on the internet, researching cases like this. You have to. If you want to have any longevity in the space, you have to be able to separate yourself to some degree. But some cases just get a little closer and squeeze a little closer to the heart, and Grace's definitely did. Grace's case is one of the few cases in recent memory, honestly, one of the few cases ever that I've covered that made me feel like I needed a break. I'm not going to take one. Don't worry. I actually looked into this case. It's been weeks. My family was plagued with sickness. So I had I researched it. I got it ready. And then I took several weeks off because everyone in my house got sick back to back to back. So I've had a little space between it. But after looking into this case, I needed a break. I felt like I did because it was it broke my heart. Grace's story broke my heart. Her life and then the end of her life broke my heart. And I'm just going to tell you that now so you know going into it, it's incredibly sad. So today I'm going to tell you that story. I read all the things so that you do not have to. And at the end of this video, I want you to answer the question of the day. I'm going to give it to you now so you can have it kicking around in your brain as we go through all the details. But obviously, I want you to answer it when you have more information. But the question of the day is this. Who do you believe was the mastermind in what happened to Grace? And do you believe that both parties involved should have gotten the death penalty? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below after we go through the details of this case. Now, with all of that said, come gather around and let me tell you the story of the horrific murder of Grace Packer. And I want to start this video off with a quote. This is a quote from the DA who handled Grace's case. The DA said of Grace's murder, and I quote, "Her life ended in a house of horrors that became hell on earth. To him, she was less than human, a thing, something to act out his fantasies on." On October 31st, 2016, Halloween, a father and his son were driving down a road in Bear Creek Township, Pennsylvania, and they had the intention to do a little bit of hunting, which hunting, spooky, very fitting for Halloween. I would never, but that's what they were going to do. They were going to go pheasant hunting. So they're driving down this road. They pull off. They start getting their stuff out, getting out of the car to do their hunting. And their dog gets out and seems to be alerted to something or smells something and kind of bolts. So the two chase the dog, obviously. The dog runs up this hill. They chase the dog up this hill, and the dog stops at like this pile of leaves at the top of the hill. And when they get there, they're shocked to find the torso and head of a female. Just the torso and the head. And at first, their brains kind of tricked them, like we hear in these stories constantly, and they thought it was a mannequin. But then one of them turned it over because it was laying face down. The torso and the head were laying face down. She was laying face down. So they turn her over, and that's when they find that, no, this is definitely not a mannequin. So cops were obviously called, and the area was cordoned off. When the cops got there, they were just kind of like, shit, because all they had was the head and torso of a female, and they really couldn't tell much about who this was by what they had. Like, they couldn't even tell her age or anything. They just knew that it was the nude torso of a female, and that she had nothing with her. Even the earrings had been taken out of her ears. Like, her ears were pierced and the earrings were removed. And now they know that they have to search this entire area because all they have is the head and the torso. There are no limbs. So they search and they search. And the following day, the search dogs, the bloodhounds, the dogs, the helpful dogs, this is a bad sentence. The dogs lead police to an area where they find the arms and the legs. So all of these body parts were sent to the medical examiner so that they could look at it and figure out what the fuck happened here and who was this? And they were able to get some information based on the remains. They were able to tell, for one, that the body had not been where it was found for very long. It had clearly, she had clearly been killed elsewhere, had been stored elsewhere for an extended amount of time, and then was brought to the area where she was discovered. And they were able to tell this because of the insect activity or lack of insect activity, that she hadn't been where the hunters found her for very long. Now, at first, they actually believed that what they were looking at here was the body of a much older woman, because for one, it had been months since she was killed, and so her features, her skin wasn't in optimal condition, obviously. But on top of that, the hair on the head was actually gray, and they were able to determine that it was gray because drain cleaner had been poured on her face and her head. And we later find that this was in an attempt to melt her face off to make identification difficult. And the chemicals in this drain cleaner had stripped the color from her hair. Despite this, though, despite it looking to be an older person, they were able to determine who the remains belonged to, and it didn't take them very long. They were able to tell this by dental records and also a medical implant. There were records of a medical implant. And they were able to tell that this was actually the body of a 14-year-old girl named Grace Packer, who was reported missing months earlier. So now let's talk about who Grace Packer was. Grace Packer was actually born Susan Hunziker, and she did not have an easy life. My God, I could cry just thinking about it because she had a hard time from beginning to end. Life was not easy for her, and it definitely wasn't fair. She was born again as Susan prematurely to parents Rose and Rodney on August 14th, 2001. And when she was first born, she was so teeny. She was only 4 pounds, 5 ounces. And the doctors weren't even sure if she'd make it, or if she had made it, what sort of quality of life she would have. Fortunately, though, doctors were surprised to see that the baby survived through the night and then survived the next several nights. This little girl had this blonde hair, these giant blue eyes, and this cute little baby smile. And her mother, Rose, said that the greatest gift God could give her was giving her her daughter. The baby girl continued to improve, so she was eventually able to go home with her parents and her siblings. I believe she was one of 3 kids. No, I know she was one of 3 kids. I believe that I know she was one of 3 kids. And she was so itty-bitty when she first went home that her parents actually dressed her in doll's clothes. Now, immediately upon being taken home, the rockiness started because there just was not a stable home life right from the beginning. And before she was even 1 year old, her and her siblings were taken from the home. They were taken away from their parents due to unsafe housing conditions and drug and criminal activity. I guess her parents did go on to get a new housing, different housing, because where they were living was where the unsafe conditions were. And I guess the people they were living with were the ones contributing to the criminal element, the drug element. So they got new housing. The kids were returned about a month later, and they were still getting in-home services, like to make sure things were cool. But it was determined that somebody in the home who was just described as a family member, like there's a document I read about this and it's heavily redacted, but a family member was making the environment still unsafe. And it was believed that the parents, Rose and Rodney, did not have the capabilities to protect their children from this family member. So because of this, Grace, who was still Susan at this point, was removed from her family, from her parents' home again when she was just 3 years old after allegations of abuse came out. And Grace was showing signs that she had most likely been sexually abused, like different things, different behaviors, things like that. But it was unclear on who may have done this or when this may have happened. It also seems that Grace's parents' mental states might have been a contributing factor to the removal as well, because they both had their issues. Rose had some mental health issues. She had bipolar disorder and anxiety, which are manageable issues, but she wasn't great at staying on her medication, which, we see. People are on medication, they feel like they're doing better, they stop taking medication. It is a cycle. Mental health is very, very tricky to deal with because your brain is convincing you, right? It's your brain. In addition to that, Rodney, Grace's father, had some intellectual disabilities, and it seems like there was some domestic violence and abuse between the two of them as well, because there were several instances where Rose would apply for protection orders, but then change her mind and go back on it. So clearly there was something causing her to go and get these protection orders, but then she was changing her mind and not going through with it. Now, it was said, across the board from what I've seen, that Rose and Rodney weren't bad people. They were good people. They were respectful people. They just had their issues. They had their own issues, and they, were in contact with this family member who had a criminal history or a history in the criminal justice system. And so it was just really difficult for them to get on their feet because of the issues that they had. But they tried, right? They went out, they got a new place, and they tried to have enough to support their kids. But I guess the place they got was no good. It was a really cheap place in this bad part of town, and it just wasn't safe for the kids, and they didn't have transportation. So they tried and they tried. They just couldn't get it together, and it's just very sad. Their attorney, who was helping them when the kids were taken away from them, said that the day that he learned that Rose and Rodney's parental rights were going to be stripped from them was one of the hardest days of his career. He said that he believed that the couple had grounds for an appeal, but that they couldn't afford to continue with his services. And he wasn't, willing to offer them pro bono work, which he doesn't have to. Would have been nice, but he doesn't have to. So he said that when he sat them down to tell them that they were losing their kids permanently, they were no longer going to be their legal parents, he said that Rose's first question, she was confused, and her first question was okay, so then how long till I get them back? And he said that it was so difficult and so heartbreaking to have to tell her that she wasn't going to ever get her kids back, that he had to take the rest of the day off. He couldn't even continue working after that conversation. So with that, Grace and her siblings were permanently taken away from Rose and Rodney, and this was incredibly difficult for their mother. I guess Rose said that she remembered when she was leaving her kids saying that she would not say goodbye to them because she knew that was forever, and she couldn't bear to think that it was going to be forever, and that she just told them that she loved them and she would never forget them. Now, once Grace and her siblings were removed from the home, Rose did everything she could to see her kids still, but they struggled a lot after they lost their kids. I guess they struggled with homelessness for several years after this, and they even spent some time living in a tent in the woods. But despite this, Rose did everything she could to go to her visitation, because I guess she was able to see the kids 3 times a week at the foster care home. right? And it was during one of these visits that Rose actually met a woman named Sarah Packer. And this was a woman who was going to one day adopt her children, well, two of her children. And she said she thought Sarah was very nice. She was always dressed nice. She always had the kids dressed nice. And she thought that this was a good situation. She felt like her kids were taken care of and they seemed happy. So the three kids spent some time in foster care before Grace, who was still Susan at this point, and her little brother were adopted by Sarah Packer and her husband, David. And it was at this point that Susan was officially named Grace. And it's actually very sad because I said they had three kids. Well, Rose's oldest daughter, Grace's older sister, was actually adopted by another family. And it's super sad that they were separated. I can't imagine how traumatic that would be. I feel like that's got to be super common, but she was adopted by somebody else. Grace and her brother were adopted by Sarah and David, and it was at this point that Rose lost all contact with her kids. Now, Grace. Grace was said to be just a super sweet kid, a little girl with this big heart who had so much love for everyone around her. Those who knew her in school, she had went to Abington Junior High, said she was great. She was super nice, very friendly, made friends easily, and went out of her way to be kind to any kid who seemed to be having a hard time. Apparently, there was this little boy named Jackie who had autism in school, and Grace always went and sat with him at lunch to make sure he wouldn't be alone. And he said that she was always patient, kind, and really pretty. Grace also had a friend named Kelsey who said that Grace was just the type of person who paid attention. She would notice you needed help and she would go out of her way to help you. She was the type of person that if she saw you crying, she would go up to you and give you a big hug and ask what she could do to make you feel better. She was like the type of girl who would go and help you with your homework. She loved butterflies. She loved to laugh and had a, quote, infectious little girl giggle. She loved playing with her friends and getting manicures and playing mini golf. She loved animals, especially cats. What little girl doesn't love cats? And she loved to swim and she loved to read and she loved hip hop and country music and summertime. She was a little girl. One of Grace's foster sisters said of Grace after her death, and I quote, "Gracie was never in a bad mood. Gracie was always happy and fun, and she always wanted to be with the girls. She was warm. She would open her heart to anyone and everyone. If you gave her the chance, she would be your best friend." Grace was in 8th grade when she was killed, and she was super excited to be going into 9th grade because she knew when she did, she'd be able to get a cell phone. And she was just the type of person who cared deeply for others, and all she wanted in return was for people to care deeply for her. She wanted to be accepted. She just wanted to be loved and to belong. Now, along with all the great things Grace had going for her, she did also grow up with some issues. She had some trouble with certain things, which doesn't surprise me considering, you know, her start in life. Being in the foster care system definitely causes trauma for a lot of children, but she had her issues. And I don't know if it was due to her upbringing. I don't know if it was due to the fact that she was born prematurely, or maybe just this was like a genetic thing because, as I said, her father had learning disabilities, but Grace had learning disabilities as well. She grew up with an intellectual disability, and she also had a speech impediment at a young age. It didn't seem from the outside, though, that this was going to be much of an issue because the person who had adopted Grace, by all accounts, should have been a perfect match for Grace and for her specific needs, okay? And this was Sarah Packer. Sarah Packer had worked for Impact Project for a couple of years, and this was a private children and youth agency that offered a variety of programs to kids who were placed in foster care. She had also worked for the Northampton County Children and Youth Family Division, and both of these jobs gave her experience working with children, and specifically children who had been through the foster system. She had literally worked as a supervisor for adoption 4 years prior to adopting Grace and her brother. Sarah had also been a foster parent along with her husband, David, for a bunch of kids, so it seems like a perfect match. It seems super pure, right? Well, it's not. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it here today. So basically, after Sarah had worked nearly a decade in that field, she ended up being suspended from her job without pay after some allegations of misconduct came out. And these were some pretty serious allegations. Apparently, it was reported that Sarah's husband, David, had been sexually abusing Grace, and not just Grace, other girls as well, for years, okay? And it's reported that these allegations happened between the years of 2006 and 2010. Now, you may remember from the beginning, Grace was born in 2001, so this would have been started happening when she was like 5 years old. And as I said, it wasn't just Grace. Another girl who was a foster child of the Packers came out later. I believe it was after Grace was killed, but she came out and she said that she too was abused sexually by David Packer. And she said that she believed that Sarah Packer knew it and just allowed it to happen. Now, the way all of this came out is that Sarah and David received another foster child, another little girl, and her name was Crystal. I don't know how old she was, but she was old enough to get there and be like, the vibes are fucking off. So she felt weird immediately. And one day she actually was like, I'm going to figure out what's going on. And she took her foster father, David's cell phone, and she was going through his phone. And in his phone, she found photos and videos of him sexually abusing the little girl. Crystal saw something and she said something. And because of her, an investigation was, conducted into these allegations. And for whatever reason, it took 1.5 years for them to do this investigation, which seems like a lot, especially if they had physical proof in his phone, but whatever, that's what they did. And it turns out that he was just disgusting with this little girl. And this wasn't Grace. The one that was in the videos, it wasn't Grace. It was the other girl. And apparently what he would do is he would abuse her. He would tie her to her bed at night. He would tie her to a chair during the day. He moved her from the room that she was in before to a room that was directly next to his room that he shared with Sarah so that he could be closer to her. And he would make her diet, make her wear sexually revealing clothes, and then sexually abuse her. And this is in a house with foster parents. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this had lasting effects on her. As an adult, she had a lot of issues. She even tried to take her life on more than one occasion and was hospitalized for this. So the investigation was done into this. As I said, it took 1.5 years for whatever reason. And when they were done, it was concluded that yes, David had done these things. And he pled guilty to these crimes. Now, guess how much time he got? I would say pause and guess down below, but I don't know if you'll actually be able to make the guess. But if you want to, pause right now and put your guess down below on how much time he got for what he did. He got 6 months to 3 years for one of the counts, okay? And 1 year to 5 years for the other count. For raping children that were put into his care by the state. Let that sink in for a second. Now, after his release in 2016, because he was paroled, he had to register as a sex offender, and his life was rightfully turned upside down from everything that happened. Not only did he go to jail and he had all this happen, but his wife, Sarah, actually divorced him as well. Which I would say, good for you, Sarah. Go, Sarah. But I don't know if you can tell from my vibes, but Sarah is a bitch. I say with full disrespect, and I hate her. So when David was arrested, Sarah actually lost her job, which rightfully so. And she lost her ability to foster children, which good. That makes total sense. And at this time, Grace is 14 and her little brother is 12. And for whatever reason, these two kids are left in the custody of Sarah Packer. Why? I don't know. But they are. So they're living with Sarah, and they're living with Sarah's new boyfriend. This is a guy named Jacob. And they're living together in a place called Abington Township, Pennsylvania, which is a small community, small town of 60,000 people. This is where Grace lived until July of 2016. And it was on July 11th of 2016 that Sarah Packer filed a missing persons report on Grace. On July 11th, 2016, Sarah Packer reported Grace missing. She told police at the time that Grace had been gone for 2 days. And she said that basically what happened is that her and Grace had gotten into an argument. I guess Grace wanted to go to a friend's house. Sarah told her no, so Grace got super pissed and stomped off to her bedroom and didn't come out. She said the next morning at about 10 a.m., she went into the room to find that Grace was gone. She said that Grace had stolen $300 from her wallet and then just snuck out, left her bedroom with her backpack and her journal. She said that Grace was very strong-willed, very bratty, very grumpy, and would essentially get very hard-headed if she didn't get her way, which truly same. Now, Sarah said that she didn't report her missing right away because remember, she's been gone for 2 days at this point because this wasn't uncommon for Grace to do. She had a little bit of an attitude problem. She would often run away and stay gone for a short period of time, but she always came back. But this time when she didn't come back, that's when her and her boyfriend realized they should probably call the police. So with this, a report was reported. Sure. And the police spoke to the public at this point saying that they needed to be on the lookout for Grace. She was 14 years old and she was described as being 5'4", 185 pounds with brown hair and glasses. Now, they really didn't have a lot of evidence to go on. The only thing that they had was a letter. It was a hand-typed Okay. It was a typed letter that was said to be typed by Grace, and this definitely strengthened the runaway theory. It corroborated what Sarah was saying happened. It basically said that Grace loved her mother and that she was sorry. She was sorry. She was such a burden and such a disappointment, that she had a great life and she didn't, know why she was the way she was, but she had to let go. From there, Grace was missing for months until that October, that Halloween, when those two hunters found her dismembered body. And they were able to tell by looking at the body that she had been dead for quite a while, like months, pretty much the whole time she had been gone, and that she had been killed and stored elsewhere, obviously not in the place she was found because of the insect activity. And they were able to see that her remains were like really dried out. Like in some reports, it was even described as like mummified, which we will get into. You'll see why when you find out where she had been stored all that time. And the only other thing they were really able to tell by the remains once she was found is that it was most likely a saw that was used to dismember. Now, around the time that Grace's body was found, Sarah was actually arrested. She was charged with endangering the welfare of a child and obstructing the administration of law. And at this point, it hadn't been announced that Grace's body had been found, just that she was missing. So people were kind of like, why is she arrested? It was just a little bit strange. But don't worry, I'm going to answer that question for you now. She actually wasn't arrested for Grace's murder, but she was arrested because of how she had acted after Grace disappeared. And I truly think that they arrested her on these lesser charges so that they could further investigate her for the murder. Like, for example, if Grace had come home safe, I don't think they would have arrested her for how she acted after Grace disappeared, even though it was technically hindering an investigation. I think they were holding her so that they could look into her for murder. Basically, the reasons that they give, the listed reasons for the arrest, was a couple of things. One, that she had waited 2 days to report her daughter missing. And on top of that, she refused to give them a photo of Grace, like a recent photo, so that they could use it for their investigation. And it took them 2 months to get her to cooperate. English is hard. Took her 2 months to cooperate at all. Police would call her over and over. She would refuse to take their calls. And then when she finally would take their calls, she would give them inaccurate information, send them on wild goose chases, making the investigation difficult. Some might say impeding upon their investigation. Then, after reporting Grace missing, she straight up moved. She moved to the 900 block of East Cherry Road in Richland Township in Bucks County near Quakertown, which isn't something I'd do right after my kid disappeared. I feel like I might, stick around in case they wanted to come home so that they'd have a home to come home to. But, that's just me. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I've never had a kid go missing, thankfully. So she moved. She got rid of all of Grace's things. She took Grace's little brother, who was 12 at this point. She enrolled him in school, didn't enroll Grace in school, and didn't tell the cops she was leaving. She just left, and then they were forced to try to locate her. The police also thought it was weird because Sarah didn't seem worried about Grace like you would expect a parent to be of a missing child. When they finally tracked her down, they were able to get her on the phone, and they were like, hey, we want to get something from you that has Grace's DNA on it in case she's ever recovered deceased. We would like to be able to identify her. And she's like, super casual, oh, sure, no problem. I was actually going to call you and see how that pesky missing persons report was going anyways. Oh, and remember that letter, that hand-typed letter, that typed letter that was written by Grace? Well, guess what? Shyamalan twist. It wasn't written by Grace. I'm sure you already knew that. It wasn't written by Grace. They were able to determine that this couldn't have been written by Grace, the vocabulary, the writing style. It was way above her skill. It was written by somebody who had a higher skill level for writing, basically. In addition to that, you remember how Sarah's initial story was that her and Grace had gotten into a fight, which caused her to leave, and the fight was over Grace wanting to go to a friend's house. Well, they would ask Sarah, who was his friend? And Sarah wouldn't tell them. So they had to go track down all of Grace's friends and talk to everybody. And it turned out nobody had plans with her. Nobody was expecting her. Now, if that wasn't weird enough, police also talked to Grace's extended family, Sarah's family. And when they talked to them, they found that they had last seen Grace on the 4th of July, for a 4th of July celebration, and that they hadn't seen her in months, and that they didn't even know that she was missing. Even though Sarah told police that she had contacted all the family trying to find out from everyone if they had heard from Grace, if they had seen Grace, because she was trying to find her. She was like, don't worry, I've spoken to everyone. But it turns out she didn't speak to anyone. No one even knew she was missing. She never told anyone. She never even posted about it on social media, which was no big deal. Maybe she wasn't a social media person, except that she was posting all the time about everyday annoyances, headaches, things like that, but nothing about her missing child. Police also came to realize that in the time before and after Grace went missing, Sarah was getting Social Security for Grace and spent a shit ton of that money. And she had even updated the Social Security paperwork while Grace was missing and didn't mention that she was missing so it wouldn't affect the money coming in every month. And she even forged Grace's signature on these documents. And then in this paper, by the way, Sarah went on to assassinate Grace's character, which is just such a low blow after everything going on. But she said that Grace was a handful. Grace was argumentative. She was sexually inappropriate, manipulative, and a thief. Okay, but then, so moving on. Moving on from that because it's making me so fucking irritated. But it's December of 2016, and police come out with a press conference. And this is when they announce 2 months later, well, like month and a half later, that Grace isn't missing anymore. Her dismembered body has been found, and that Sarah is being looked at as a person of interest in this case. So they tell the public, like, we still need your help. We need you to come forward with anything you know, anything you may have seen. Did you see Sarah anywhere? Did you see Grace anywhere? Did you see them together? Let us know anything and everything that you know. Anyways, as I said, Sarah has been arrested. She's arrested at this point, and initially she's held on a $200,000 bail, but that ended up getting reduced to $10,000. So from $200,000 to $10,000, and that's because she wasn't being held on murder charges at this point. She was just being held on obstruction and endangering the welfare of a child. So because her bail was lowered so much, she was able to make bail. Her boyfriend Jacob posted bail, and she got out. From there, it took a year for an arrest to be made for the actual murder of Grace, but an arrest was made. In July of the following year, police arrested Sarah Packer in connection with the murder of her 14-year-old daughter, Grace Packer. And they arrested Sarah's boyfriend, Jacob Sullivan. So how this happened, how they came to be able to arrest both Sarah and Jacob, was actually pretty fortuitous, pretty serendipitous for the police, because Sarah and Jacob actually tried to take their own lives. Apparently what happened here is Jacob had been found unconscious in his home, and he was found by his girlfriend. And I'm not talking about Sarah. He had another girlfriend, and this was Catherine. Apparently Catherine, Jacob, and Sarah were all in a polyamorous relationship with each other. So Catherine, finds him passed out, ODing from pills in the home. She calls, the ambulance. He's taken in the ambulance to the hospital. And when the house was searched, they actually found a note that was written by Jacob. And in the note, he basically said that the police and the media were lying about him, lying about Sarah, making their lives super difficult, and they couldn't take it anymore. And said, like, don't believe anything that they say about us. Don't believe it. It's not true. And this was addressed to his kids because he was a father. Okay. Then Sarah was found, again, by Catherine, unconscious in the bathroom. She was rushed to the hospital as well, and she was found to have been, just like Jacob, ODing on pills. Can you imagine being Catherine? Okay, you find your boyfriend unconscious, ODing on pills. You get him off safely to the hospital. Then you find Sarah in the bathroom going through the same thing, have to get her off to the hospital. It sounds like a lot. It turns out that Sarah and Jacob had entered into a suicide pact together. Now, why would they do this? They did this because Sarah had been publicly named as a person of interest, a suspect in Grace's murder. And at this point, they were realizing that their gooses were effectively cooked, so they wanted to end it before they were going to be arrested. Now, they got all these pills, and I guess they got them from Catherine, and I don't know what she thought these pills were for. Like, she swears, and it's reported everywhere. She did not know this was going to happen. She didn't know they were going to try to take their own lives, and she didn't even know that they had killed Grace. She said that she was absolutely devastated and, like, shocked to learn that this was the case. Now, it was in the hospital that Jacob made a confession, and I don't know if he actually thought he was going to die or if the guilt got to him or what, but he told the hospital staff, like, I need to make a confession. And then he told them that he killed Grace. He told several people who worked at the hospital that he killed Grace. And then he made a detailed confession to the police about the rape, the torture, and the murder of 14-year-old Grace at the hands of Jacob and also her mother. He gave a detailed account of the 18 hours of horror that this little girl sustained. Jacob told them that Grace's murder was totally planned. He said that Sarah and he started planning Grace's murder in the fall of 2015, actually, and they were going to do this based on a shared fantasy that they had to rape and murder a child. And at the time that they were planning this, Grace actually wasn't even living with them anymore. Grace had left and she had been staying with family in North Carolina. She'd been there for months. She was staying with Sarah's ex-husband, David's sister, Katie. And apparently Grace had been there for months and she was even enrolled in school and she had been thriving there. She was happy and had a stable home life, and she was even being overseen by county social services, like a county social services agency there. But in less than a year, she was required to move back home to Pennsylvania to be with Sarah Edgar. Now, initially, the plan was for Jacob and Sarah to kill Grace immediately upon her returning, but they actually waited months because she returned in November of 2015, and then she wasn't killed until July of 2016. And they did this. So basically what happened is they were living in that first house, the one that they were living in before Grace went missing. So they took Grace from this house to the house in Quakertown. And that's where all of this happened. That was the house that they ended up living in after Grace went missing. And I guess initially they were kind of going back and forth between both houses. They lived in both houses. So in the early morning hours of July 8th, 2016, Sarah and Jacob, who had the night before drugged Grace's pudding so that she would be all groggy, they loaded her into the car and made the drive to the home in Quakertown. This is in the morning, okay? And it turns out that Sarah had been drugging Grace for weeks prior to this murder to keep her groggy and keep her docile. It's so fucking sad. So Grace, 14 years old, is woken up in the morning and ushered out into a car, still in her pajamas, okay, all groggy, all sleepy from being drugged the night before, and is driven to this home in Quakertown. And as soon as she enters this home with these two monsters, Jacob starts hitting her over and over in the face. He hits her so much that he busts open her lip before forcing her to march up the stairs to the attic on the 3rd floor. When I picture this, it's just like, I can't. And this is happening in the morning. This little girl is just waking up. It's just so fucking sad. So she's taken upstairs to this attic room, and it's in this room that she is raped by Jacob Sullivan, a huge man. You'll see photos. You've seen photos. A huge man who had taken Viagra to make sure that he was going to be able to do what he wanted to do. So little Grace is being assaulted by this man while her mother stands by and watches. And Grace cries out to her mom, is in pain, and is like begging for help. And her mother just stares at her and actually says to her, quote, "I can't help you. This is your life now." Jacob said that Sarah wanted Grace to see that she was actively standing by and not helping her. He said that both he and Sarah got off on this. Then, once he was done doing what he was doing to Grace, an experience that he said wasn't enjoyable for either of them, Grace sat there, terrified, in pain, crying, hysterical, scared, and Jacob sat there and tried to console the girl after what he did to her. He told police that he didn't want what happened to Grace to be a, quote, terror show. He wanted her to have fun. He said it wasn't meant to be mean, that obviously it was mean, but it wasn't meant to be mean, that he just had these fantasies, that he was a, quote, closeted rapist, and that he loved watching violent porn, and that he just wanted to act it out himself. It was at this point that Sarah left the home. She left Jacob and Grace alone so that she could go to the store and get more medicine to drug Grace. She got Tylenol PM and some other medication, and when she got back, she told Grace, like, take this. It's going to help with the pain that you're feeling after being raped by a grown man. This is just so upsetting to me. It makes me like physically ill. Like how you could do this to anyone, let alone your own child, makes no sense to me. But Jacob said that they chose Grace specifically because Sarah hated Grace. She hated her. And she said Grace was rebellious, and this was her way of finally having control over this little girl. So Grace took this medication, and the first dose they gave her, I guess they gave her too much, obviously, and it made her sick, so she vomited it. So then they forced her to take more. They forced her to take too much again, and then they bound her, they gagged her with a pink ball gag, and they stuffed her in a hot cedar closet in July to die. Sarah and Jacob then left. They drove their car back to their home in Abington and waited hours until about 3 a.m. before they drove back to the home in Quakertown so they could figure out what they were going to do with Grace's body. When they got back to the house, they found that Grace was still alive. She'd clearly been through hell because of, all the drugs that had been in her system, the assault that she had went through, the fact that she was left in this hot closet in July. But she did what she could to save herself. She got the ball gag out of her mouth. She had even gotten some of her bindings loose, but it hadn't been enough. And when I think about this, their plan was to leave her to die in the heat from like a drug overdose. It's so fucking evil. In response to finding her alive, Jacob crawled on the floor behind her and put her in a chokehold and started strangling her to death. And he strangled her as she fought and she clawed at him, wanting to live. And the whole time he just kept telling her, like, it's okay, honey, just let go. It's time to let go. It's okay to let go. And as Grace looked up at her mother, Sarah repeated the same sentiment, like, it's okay to go, honey, you can go. And so Sarah stood by and watched Jacob strangle Grace to death. And Jacob said, like he told investigators, that it took way longer than he expected it would. Like it was harder than he thought it would be physically to strangle a little girl to death. And when he said this, he chuckled. There were a couple of things that he chuckled about when he was confessing, like this, and the fact that Sarah stood by and watched the assault and said, like, this was your life now. He chuckled about that too. He is a monster. And don't get me wrong, Sarah is a fucking monster too, because while this happened, while Grace was being choked and they were both telling her it was okay, Sarah held her hand, stroked her hand, and was like, it's okay to go. It's okay to go. And she too said that it felt like forever, but it was probably just a couple of minutes. And later she was asked at trial, like, how do you think this felt for Grace? How long do you think it felt for Grace? And Sarah was just like, it probably felt like forever. Sarah and Jacob then took Grace's body and they put her inside this cardboard box that also contained some of Jacob's comic books. And then they covered her in cat litter, hoping that this would help with the smell. This was Sarah's idea. And then they put that box in their attic where it stayed until October. And 3 days later, they reported Grace missing. Months her body was in that hot attic, dude. And the only reason they ended up moving her and disposing of her the way that they did is because that October, police had come to the home. They figured out where they were. They came to the home and they said that they needed Grace's medical records. And once police came and left, the two were like, okay, we need to do something. They're probably getting on to us. They're definitely getting too close. We need to do something and get her out of here. And they were right in thinking that police were getting close, because when they entered the home, they noticed that there was nothing there for Grace. There were no photos of her on the walls. There wasn't even a room set up for her if she was to come back. So anyways, thinking that police were onto them, they decided that they needed to get rid of Grace's body. So they took her out of that box. They put her in the bathtub and they proceeded to dismember her, with Jacobs describing this experience to being similar to carving a turkey. They dismembered her with a bow saw that Sarah had bought 2 weeks prior, saying that she was buying this with the dual purpose of cutting firewood and dismembering her child. And they were able to find a receipt for this bow saw, and in finding this receipt, they were able to go to the store, see the surveillance footage, and they saw Sarah there buying the saw along with 2 additional blades from a Tractor Supply store. After dismembering Grace, they then took her remains and put them into plastic totes and then put them in the back of Jacob's car before getting in the car and just driving aimlessly. They didn't know what they were going to do with her, but they drove and drove until they found a place that they thought was sufficient, and then they discarded her on the side of the road like a piece of trash. After killing, dismembering, and discarding Grace's body, the two then decided they were just going to try to go about life as normal as possible. They weren't going to talk about it. They weren't going to Google anything about the murder, the disappearance, anything like that to, keep their internet history clear. And they went on this way until police started sniffing around. They realized that they were being caught. They tried to take their own lives, and now they were getting a confession. Now, after telling police this, Jacob, he had the nerve to ask police. He was like, listen, sorry, I'm thirsty, 1 second. He had the nerve to ask police to please keep him out of general population because he didn't want to be assaulted by prisoners. He said he would rather die than have what happened to Grace happen to him. The nerve. Holy shit. The nerve on this man. Oh my, I do not. After Grace's body was recovered, a memorial was held in her honor that was called, quote, Abington Loves Grace. A woman named Andrea was the one who like arrange the memorial service. And she didn't know Grace, but she had a son who was about the same age. And she said that she just felt compelled to do something. She didn't want Grace's murder to be the end of her story. A GoFundMe page was set up and they received so many donations, more than they needed. So the excess funds were used for a scholarship in Grace's name for a child with special needs, because Grace herself had special needs and she was always the type to have a heart for other kids with special needs. And as for the memorial, it took place that January, the January after she was discovered, and hundreds of people came to support Grace and say their goodbyes. There were photos of Grace and flowers, and the reverend who presided over the funeral did not hide what happened to her. The reverend said that it was tragic, but it couldn't be swept under the rug. It needed to be in your face. You needed to see that these types of things happened so the community could band together and be stronger to protect their most vulnerable. Friends came and told stories about Grace, things that made her happy, things that she was excited for. And then at the end of the service, they released pink and purple balloons into the sky because these were Grace's favorite colors. During her funeral, it was announced that the community was trying to raise money with the hopes to open a foundation that helps foster children called On Gracie's Wings. They do luncheons and paint nights and toy drives and get school supplies and presents at Christmas. And their purpose is to help children in foster care, among other groups, have a safe transition to a better life. And this still exists. I went to their Facebook page. They're still doing stuff. They're still doing the damn thing. On Gracie's Wings, in her name, in her honor. Anyways, investigation, trial. Jacob was arrested, and as I'm sure you can imagine, he was charged with all kinds of shit. He was charged with rape. He was charged with murder. He was charged with abuse of a corpse, etc., etc. And when he was brought into the courtroom, he apologized for his actions. So in case you were wondering or worried or wondering worriedly, 3 hours after Jacob was arrested, Sarah was also arrested. I think I mentioned that, but I cannot remember. She was arrested. So remember, she was arrested for, impeding on an investigation. Then she was released on bail. Well, now she's rearrested with new charges. She was facing charges related to Grace's murder, and she was also facing charges for defrauding the government, because you remember she's still getting Grace's checks and lying about Grace so that she can get money after she's murdered this little girl. Which I'm like, good. All the charges on both of these assholes, and neither of them were given bail. Jacob was strangely supportive of Sarah. He was like, I don't know why they're coming down so hard on her. She didn't kill Grace. I did. Plus, Grace was an absolute nightmare. This is what he said. And something else that he said that was so frustrating is at some point, because they didn't like Grace, because they hated Grace, they considered letting Grace go, returning her to sender or whatever. And the reason they didn't do this is because they wanted to keep getting the money for her. After the two were arrested, people were pissed, dude. People were so pissed. A change.org petition was created, and it was signed by 500 people, with all of them signing it, saying that they wanted both Jacob and Sarah to be punished to the highest extent of the law. They were coming for their throats. Now, once it came out that Grace had been murdered, her biological mother, Rose, was devastated, dude, because though she hadn't seen her in years, she hadn't seen her kids in years, she lost her parental rights, she had assumed that the system had put her kids into a safe and loving home. She said she had lots of regrets, and she so wished she could go back and fix so many things so her children had stayed with her and Grace would still be alive today. She said that she's very upset she couldn't protect her children, couldn't save Grace. She said, Grace was alone. She was killed alone and took her last breath alone. She said she just cannot imagine what her child went through. Being beaten, being raped, being stuffed in a closet, to die alone in the heat. She can't imagine what Grace felt like, and that is incredibly just hard for her. She said that one day she had come home, how she found out about this is one day she came home and there was just a card from a detective on her door that just said call me about a runaway. And she didn't at all think that this was Grace. She actually thought it was her oldest daughter, because at this time she would have been almost 18. So she thought that her oldest daughter had ran away from her adopted family looking for her bio family, because she was an adult now and she could look it up. But then she found out it was Grace, and she was just what the fuck, shocked. And then shortly after that, she found out Grace was gone, and she said she just crumbled apart and fell to the floor. She said she just always felt in her heart that she would see her daughter again one day, and now she was never going to get to. And she'll never see her again because of Sarah, because of a woman that she thought her child would be safe with, because of somebody who was supposed to take care of her, somebody who worked in the foster system, somebody who was supposed to be a good match, but somebody who instead completely planned to murder this child. And oh my God, it's so creepy. But this girl, a foster daughter who had lived with Sarah for a bit, came out and told a story after, and oh my God. So she told a couple of things. First, she said, like, one of the first things she said, and this is so creepy, is she said that, like, while she was living with Sarah, like in the foster situation, she and Sarah had been watching like an episode of CSI or something along the lines, some true crime show. And while watching it, Sarah had like looked at her and been like, man, if I was going to kill somebody, I would dismember the body and set it on fire so that they could never recover it. Which obviously Grace wasn't set on fire, but when you hear this, it's so creepy considering what did happen. And another thing this girl said, which is just like, it gives me the chills. She said that while she was staying with Sarah, she herself, the foster daughter, actually became pregnant. And she said that once Sarah found out she was pregnant, she was like really going hard trying to convince this girl to give this baby up for adoption so that Sarah could adopt the baby. And she said initially she agreed, like, okay, I will do this. But something inside of her was like, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. As some might say, her lizard brain was a tingling. So she was like, I'm not going to. I feel like if I do this, I'm going to regret it. And now that she knows what happens, she's like, holy fuck, I'm so glad I didn't do that. So back in jail, Sarah is on suicide watch, saying that she is devastated. She is devastated at the allegations made against her. And her attorney spoke out on her behalf and was like, this is all BS. Like Jacob, I don't know why he's saying this. First, in his suicide note, he says that, like, they had nothing to do with this. Now, all of a sudden, he's going to confess to all these things that he didn't do and she didn't do. It all sounds a little suspicious. Her attorneys also claimed that they were going to have her evaluated for mental health issues. So they were trying to figure out some way to get her off on these charges, which, you know, is their job. Now, the prosecution was considering going after the death penalty in this case because they believed that there were aggravating factors that would warrant such a punishment, like the fact that Grace had been kidnapped and tortured in the commission of this murder. So after some deliberation, they thought about it. They, weighed their options, whatever prosecutors do be doing, and they decided that, yes, they would be going after the death penalty for both Sarah and Jacob. Now, while the murder case was pending, Grace's biological parents actually tried to have themselves made the executors of Grace's estate so that they could sue the social services agencies that failed their daughter. Grace's adopted grandparents, who were David's parents, like countered this and were like, it seems weird that all of a sudden Grace's biological parents want to be involved. Like, what are your motives? Why do you want to be involved? And then Rose and Rodney countered, being like, you guys knew about the abuse, you let it go on, you should not be, they're fighting, they're going back and forth. And then the grandparents are like, well, maybe we knew, but anytime we saw any abuse, we told them to stop it, which means they did know things were happening, and that's super fucked. In the end, neither Grace's parents nor her grandparents were made an executor of the state. Instead, like a court-appointed administrator, like somebody who was totally neutral, was put in charge. There was a lawsuit, though, by this, the lawsuit did happen, and it was against, quote, 3 defendants that provided foster, adoption, and behavioral health services to Grace throughout her life, end quote. And the estate of Grace Packer ended up getting a settlement of $8.9 million, but I have no idea who this money, went to. Anyways, back to these 2 dickheads. The prosecution was not having it. They were like, Grace was a disposable child to these 2, and we, the prosecution, the court, will be her voice since she no longer has one because they took it. And they initially wanted to try them together. That was their whole plan, is to have one trial for both of them. But ultimately, they ended up having separate trials. That's the word I'm looking for. And the trials began in 2019. Now, for Jacob. His attorney tried to have his confession thrown out, but thankfully that was unsuccessful. So they were like, okay, here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to try to blame the entire thing on Sarah. So everyone was buckling in for a lengthy trial because this man who had confessed to the rape, confessed to the murder, was now going to try to blame it all on Sarah, and it was going to be a whole thing. But then, Shyamalan twist, Jacob surprised everybody by actually just pleading guilty. I guess when he first went to do this, the legalities of it and such really stressed him out. His blood pressure spiked super high and he had to be rushed to the hospital. I guess he was supposed to take medication for anxiety and high blood pressure every day, and in jail they didn't give it to him, which caused the medical episode. Either way, after his medical episode, he came back, he pled guilty. And it's believed that this was done in part because it didn't seem like it was going to be super successful for him to try to blame the whole thing on Sarah and say he was manipulated by Sarah, because like a psychiatrist or a psychologist, one of them Moraine doctors, testified that Jacob was actually very intelligent, too smart to be manipulated by Sarah. I guess he had an IQ that was high enough to put him at superior intelligence. He was fucking smart. He's obviously stupid, but he was intelligent enough that it would be hard for the jury to buy that he was manipulated by Sarah. And with that said, Sarah was also said to be very smart, of superior intelligence. She had a degree in psychology and an IQ of over 140. Anyways, he pleads guilty and a jury is brought in from Philly to determine what his sentencing is going to be. Because even though he's pled guilty, he's now still, like, he didn't make like a plea deal. He's still able to either get life in prison without parole or the death penalty. And the prosecution was like, he should absolutely get the death penalty for his unspeakable, heinous crimes. The prosecutor said this was the worst crime they had seen in all the years they'd been a prosecutor. The prosecutor added that Jacob and Sarah had decided together that Grace was, quote, not worth the air she breathed, and that Jacob had made Grace's last moments on earth a living hell. Now, during this hearing, before going into the details of what actually happened to Grace, the prosecutor looked at the jury and they're like, okay, this is what I need you to do. And the jury's like, we're listening. And the prosecutor was like, I need you to picture the absolute worst thing you could ever imagine happening to a child. You got that in your head? Good. You need that in your mind, because that's what we're about to talk about. That's what this dickhead did to Grace. And then they were shown everything. They heard his confession. They heard everything he said happened. They were shown photos of Grace's body in that condition and photos of the closet where she had been held and some of her bindings. It was so bad. Everything that this jury saw, this crime was so bad that the judge urged the jury to seek mental health services and counseling after going through this trial. Now, Jacob's attorneys did the best they could to get him a lighter punishment, not give him the death penalty. They were still going with the method of blaming it on Sarah. They said that Sarah had a history of sexually abusing children with her prior partner, her husband, David, and said that Sarah was the driving force. Sarah planned it. It was all her fault. The defense basically said that Jacob should be given the same sentence that Sarah was being given for fairness and all that. And basically he was saying that Jacob should get a lighter sentence because Sarah had actually entered into a plea deal, which we're going to get into. But in her plea deal, by the way, she had to testify at Jacob's sentencing hearing, and she had to admit everything she had done. This woman was evil. She smirked. She smirked at times while telling the court the whole story. She told the court how she stood by and she watched Jacob rape Grace. She said that Grace was difficult. She hated her and she wanted her dead. She admitted to helping kill Grace, helping bind her, even said that she was the one who put the ball gag in her mouth. She even admitted to the court that during the rape, she told Grace, I can't help you. This is your life now. And she said she didn't want to help Grace. She said specifically of this, quote, Grace had become, for lack of a better word, a non-entity. She just didn't exist anymore. I wanted her to go away. Despite telling the court all of this, she did say that this whole rape fantasy wasn't her fantasy. It was something that just Jacob had, and that she just went along with it because she didn't think that she could tell him no without losing him. She actually told the court that the initial plan wasn't to murder Grace at all. They were going to keep her. They were going to keep her up in the attic as a sex slave so that Jacob could use her whenever he wanted. But when he changed his mind and decided to kill her, she just went along with it. During this hearing, Grace's little brother spoke. Her biological little brother, who was also adopted by the Packers. He was 14 at this time, and I can only imagine how horrible this was for him. He said that the only way that he could cope with the loss of his sister, with the murder of his sister, is for people to learn her story, to hear her story, and do what they could to help kids in the future. He said that if Grace knew that her story was going to help other kids, if what happened to her was going to help other children, she would have given her life for that. And he said his sister was a hero. And then he ended his statement with saying, quote, watch out for all the kids so that a loss like Grace's loss never happens again. Do your best to help kids who can't help themselves. Before closing out the hearing, the prosecutor stood in silence for 2 minutes, the amount of time it was believed it took for Grace to be strangled to death. All the while, photos of Grace were projected. Different photos of her were being shown during this moment of silence, and the prosecutor just stared into Jacob's face. The prosecution then asked the jury to give Jacob Sullivan the death penalty, reminding them that Grace's life ended in a house of horrors that became a hell on earth. The defense asked that Jacob's life be spared. They said that he should be given leniency because, after all, he did confess. He did tell them what happened so that they knew the full story. Nobody had to wonder. But the prosecution made a good point in saying that sometimes these dicks who do these horrible things like to tell the stories. They like reliving what they did. So those confessions could have just been for him. The defense also tried to say, it wasn't Jacob. Jacob wasn't the mastermind. Sarah was the mastermind, and she manipulated and controlled Jacob. But Jacob's own words undid this, because Jacob said that Sarah liked him to be in control of the relationship. Those were his words. Plus, the prosecution was like, listen, jury, Mr. or Mrs. Jury member, question for you. Could anyone dominate and manipulate you into doing what Jacob Sullivan did to Grace Packer? I'm going to think that's a no. That's going to be a no from me, dog. And if that wasn't enough to seal his fate, which I think it probably was, there was more. The nurse, one of the nurses who took care of Jacob after he tried to take his own life, she testified at this hearing, and she told the court that Jacob told her Grace was the worst thing that ever happened to him and his family, that he killed her, and he liked it. Now, in order for Jacob to get the death penalty, it had to be a unanimous decision. We've talked about this in other cases before, but even if there's just one holdout on the jury, it would automatically be life in prison, not the death penalty. It actually took days for the jury to come back with a decision. And at one point, they even came out and they were like, listen, we cannot come to a unanimous decision. And the judge told them to go back and keep deliberating, which actually was kind of a controversial take because Jacob's attorney said that this sent the message to the jury that a life sentence was, quote, unacceptable. And let me know what you think about this down below, because I see what his attorney is saying, to be honest. Like, it's a good argument, but emotionally speaking, I don't care. But that is emotionally speaking, not logically speaking, because everybody, we know fair trials and all that. But I'm curious what you think. Let me know what you think about that argument down below. In the end, though, the jury did come back with a unanimous decision. They had sentenced Jacob Sullivan to death for the murder of Grace Packer. And when he heard his fate, he showed no emotion. And when asked if he'd like to make a statement, he simply said, no, thank you. In addition to the death sentence, the judge added an additional and consecutive life sentence plus 44 to 88 years in prison for his other crimes. But those sentences will only become relevant if Jacob was able to successfully appeal his death sentence, which would be automatic because an appeal automatically goes into effect in Pennsylvania when somebody is given a death sentence. So if he was able to successfully appeal, then he'd have to, serve that other sentence. So he was pretty much fucked for life. Now, this judge did not like Jacob. It was clear this judge was Judge Gibbons, and they actually sort of taunted Jacob for asking the cops to not put him in Gen Pop. You remember when he was like, please don't do that. I don't want what happened to Grace to happen to me. The judge kind of taunted him about this. The judge said to Jacob, quote, like the little baby you are, you ask them to protect you because you're scared to have done to you what you did to this child. When handing down the sentence, the judge said, quote, Jacob, you have no soul. And then they added, quote, I have never said that to another human being in my life, and I hope to not say it again, though I expect to say something similar to Sarah Packer. The following day, Sarah Packer was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. The judge told her that she was an utter and miserable failure at being a human being, and then added, quote, evil attracts evil. Evil recognizes evil. The judge also told Sarah, good luck, because you're going to prison with a lot of women, and a lot of those women are mothers. And guess where their kids are? Foster care. And they're all sitting there praying that their kids don't end up with somebody like you. And man, she was evil. Sarah Packer is evil. Definitely as evil as Jacob Sullivan, maybe even more so. But the reason that she was given a plea deal is because the physical evidence against her was a lot weaker. Jacob admitted he's the one that raped her. Jacob admitted he's the one that killed her. And the evidence that they had against her wouldn't have really qualified for the death penalty anyway. Now, when the prosecutor read victim impact statements at Sarah's trial, her sentencing hearing, they noticed that Sarah wouldn't even look at them. She seemed disinterested in the whole thing. So the prosecutor looked at the judge and was like, can you make her look at me when I'm reading these statements, because she took Grace's voice and I'm going to be that for her, and she needs to listen. They also said, the prosecutor said, that they had trouble understanding how a mother could do this to their own child, to their own daughter, but they realized in going through this case that Sarah Packer was never a mother to Grace. She was never a parent. She didn't want to be a parent to her, and that the word mother out of Sarah Packer's mouth was a profanity. It's just so sad, because it felt like, in looking through this, that nobody loved Grace and nobody cared for Grace. But when I got to like the victim impact statements and things like that, it seems that people did. People in her family came forward and talked about her, showed photos of her during happier times, like her eating a piece of birthday cake or playing in the pool or sitting smiling in her uncle's big rig. Now, as I said, Jacob got an automatic appeal. And when they appealed for him, when his attorneys did the appeal, basically their argument was that the judge had, that when the judge had, the jury continued deliberating. It put, the idea that a life sentence wasn't sufficient, blah, blah, blah. That was their argument, but the appeal was rejected. It didn't actually end up mattering, though, because on April 30th, 2020, after less than a year of him being in prison, Jacob Sullivan actually died in prison of cardiac-related issues. Basically, he had an aortic aneurysm. And I, upon learning that he died this way, actually Googled, quote, "Does it hurt to die of an aortic aneurysm?" Maybe I'm a fucking asshole. I don't know. But this is what it said. I'm going to read this quote. "If your aortic aneurysm ruptures, you will feel a sudden and severe pain in the middle or side of your abdomen." Okay. "In men, the pain can also radiate down into the scrotum." So that's what he died of, alone in prison at the age of, I think, 47, which, good. Because honestly, if anyone deserves to have their chest rupture and their dick get zapped off, it's this guy. And I know I'm not a doctor, and that's not really what happened to him, but it's what I like to imagine. Blow up this guy's heart and zap off his dick. He sucks. And I guess they were going to kill him anyways, but it would have been nice if he could have suffered in prison like a little bit longer, because he probably would have had to suffer in prison for a while, because there was a moratorium, I believe there still is, on executions in the state. So it would have been a long time of him being in jail. And the prosecution basically said, with him dying this way, at least they don't have to deal with several appeals forever. So there's that. Now, if you're like me, you're probably horrified to think about the fact that this woman was a foster parent. She worked with kids all her life. She fostered a number of kids that she didn't go on to adopt. We know that her ex-husband David was a creep supreme, and now her boyfriend Jacob is a fucking monster. And the one thing that is the same, what's the word? The one thing that's the same? There's a word for this. It's Sarah Packer, a predator herself. She's the one thing that all of this has in common. Common theme. That's what I was looking for. After Sarah was arrested, convicted, all that jazz, an investigation was conducted into whether or not there had been any other abuse of any other children in Sarah's care. Why this didn't happen after her first husband was arrested for raping children in her care is a good fucking question, which I don't have the answer to. In looking into this, they found that Sarah had been a foster mother to about 30 kids. 30. She had said that she found being a foster mother very rewarding. She wanted to work with kids so that she could take part in influencing their lives. She said that wherever her career took her, all she cared about was that she was put into a position where she could benefit other people, which is just fucking laughable now, right? But from what I've seen, the official findings of this report haven't been released, or at least they haven't been made public. But some kids that were in their care during the years that they were fostering, during the years that she and David were fostering, have come out and spoke, so we have some information. So some of these kids that came forward and spoke were in the home at the same time Grace was there, so they have some accounts of how she was treated. And as I'm sure you can imagine, there were a lot of red flags the entire time, and Grace was abused pretty much the entire time she was in Sarah's care. These kids noted that there was a huge difference between how Grace was treated and how her brother was treated. They seemed to love the boy, but Grace, no. She was treated so shitty. She was emotionally abused. They would get mad at her and tell her to, quote, be normal. She was physically abused by both David and Sarah. And one kid even saw them beating her with this big orange strap, and they would lock her up in the basement or lock her in her bedroom and not let her leave. They said that Sarah was mean to Grace. Grace was just different. Her brain worked different. her body worked differently, and this was upsetting to Sarah because she didn't like to have to deal with it. Sometimes she'd have to show Grace how to do something more than once or tell her to do something more than once, and this would piss Sarah off. She would yell at her and hit her even though it wasn't her fault, and Grace was just never happy at home. She'd be smiling all day, but as soon as she entered that house, the smile would be gone. And it just breaks my heart because I truly believe all Grace wanted was to be loved, and she never got that. She never got to experience that. And it's what all kids want, and it's what she deserved, and she never got it. And friends came out and told, their story and said that Grace would tell them that she thought her adopted mother didn't like her and definitely didn't love her. And that's just what we know about. That is just what we've been told by people who were there. But I can't imagine it got much better once she was done fostering and she was left alone with just Grace and her brother. I can't imagine the abuse she went through. I did read some reports that said in the days leading up to the murders, she was raped at least 2 times by Jacob. And it just seems like so many people knew, but nobody did anything. Like the kids said they reported it. They reported this abuse happening, but that was it. They reported it and nothing happened. Sarah stayed in her job and kept fostering kids. And even Grace herself had told people at school that she was being abused. Nothing happened. Kids said that she would show up hungry. She was hungry. Nothing happened. And this lady who I believe was from church that went to church with Sarah said she knew. Sarah had told her that she had given Grace sleeping pills to knock her out and keep her docile. But nobody did anything. Now, changes were made after Grace's death as a result of numerous failures, which always happens. It takes a kid dying for people to fucking do something. And they noted that there are many times Grace could have been saved. Social services workers need increased vetting, and all children's services agencies in the state need to talk to each other and allow police access to information when they ask for it, which seems like duh. You would think that this would just be done, but we see that it's not all the time. And it took forever for any steps to actually be taken. I saw an article that came out like 5 years after the murders that said a lot of promises have been made, but nobody's done something. Nobody's done anything, and it's very disappointing. By 2021, though, they finally had done something. They unveiled the child welfare reform legislation in memory of Grace Packer called, quote, Grace's Law, and it included 3 bills. It's very wordy. You can look it up, but the gist is that they would require the implementation of the statewide child welfare case management system, which was mandated in 2014, but wasn't being used, which is a shame because, what is the point of mandating something that's not going to be used? But sure. They also changed the requirement to keep records from 10 to 30 years and eliminate the provision providing the expunction for a perpetrator who was a minor at the time of the alleged abuse upon that individual. And they made it so that there had to be a definition for a, quote, valid report in the Pennsylvania Child Protective Services Law. Which, okay, that's something. It doesn't really sound like enough to me, though. That's just my opinion. It sounds like they could do more. I don't know what. I don't know how to fix this problem. This is why it is a problem. But it's just a fucking shame because Grace was in constant danger her whole life. And so many people could have done something and they didn't. And that is disheartening. You remember I told you I read that report and it was heavily redacted. Well, in that report, you could see that she was in communication with governmental agencies over and over and over throughout her entire life. She was constantly being monitored, but somehow nobody caught this. Nobody did anything to help her, so it continued. It's just like Judge Given said while she was sentencing Grace's murderers. The judge said, quote, "So ends the story of Grace Packer. We all let her down." Today, we're going to be discussing the absolutely horrific murder of 4-year-old Samiah Downing. I'm going to start this video right off the bat. I don't usually do this, but I am going to give a trigger warning because this is a case involving a child. And this is a case that deals heavily with child abuse leading up to this poor little baby's murder. And I know that that's not for everyone. So if this one is going to be too tough for you, I get it. Trust me. See you next Monday. You can choose to not watch. You guys know I don't even really like to do kids' cases, but this case felt very important to do once I started learning about it. It felt important to talk about because this little girl went through absolute hell in her short time on this planet, particularly in 1 year in specific. And some people had no idea she was going through it, and some people had ideas and didn't do anything about it. And that's just so messed up. And I think it's important to talk about things you could watch for one, to maybe stop something like this from happening if you can. And it also hit home for me in particular because of the location. This happened in Adelanto, California, which is part of the high desert, which is incidentally where I spent all of my formative years, was in the high desert, not Adelanto specifically, but I did live in Adelanto for a time. I went to an elementary school in Adelanto. So when I was reading about it, it felt personal in that regard. And so I kept looking into it and kept reading and listening to everything I could find on the case. And now that I have all this information, I wanted to bring it to you today. With that said, today I'm going to tell you the entire story. And while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup. And if that's not really your thing, no problem. That's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel you like more. But if you're on the fence, you're not sure how you feel, maybe stick around. I think you could be surprised by how much you like me. Now, with all of that said, I think it's time we just get into this absolutely horrible case. So come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrific and tragic murder of 4-year-old Samiah Downing. Samiah Christine Cornell Downing was born February 14th, 2008 on Valentine's Day to teenage parents Ronald and Monica, and was given the middle name Christine after her grandmother, who had passed away a few years before she was born. Samiah was known as just being a wonderful girl, a happy girl, a loving child. She loved Dora the Explorer and going to Chuck E. Cheese. Samiah and her grandpa Chris would go on these little grandpa-granddaughter dates to Chuck E. Cheese because she loved it so much. And she was just a super happy and playful kid, not reserved at all. She would just run around the arcade area and climb all over things and crawl through the tunnels and just had a ton of energy and love for her little life. And man, she was adorable, painfully cute with these big round cheeks and big round brown eyes. And I mean, just look at her. Like, just look at her. Oh my God. So the relationship between Samiah's parents, Ronald and Monica, didn't last very long. They were very young. I don't know the nature of their relationship when they first got together and how solid they were in the first place. But by the time Samiah was 2 years old, Ronald had already dipped out. He had left and he had found himself a new girlfriend in another teenage girl named Bianca Stanch. And once he started dating Bianca, he didn't really see Samiah that much anymore. He had just kind of, went about his new life and left that behind. And Samiah lived full time with her mother, her new baby brother, because Monica had had another child, a son, and family who was helping her take care of the kids because she was a new single young mother trying to navigate life on her own. She was getting jobs and she was working as much as she could, so she needed the help, especially since Samiah's father had effectively just been like, good luck, but I'm going to go do something else. I know I helped make this kid, like half this kid, but I don't want to have part in it. And it's not like Ronald didn't like kids in general. It just seemed like he didn't want to be involved with Samiah because by February of 2011, Ronald and Bianca were announcing that they were now pregnant with their first child. And I mean, that's cool, except for the fact that you don't even take care of the child you have now. This was just like sort of how Ronald was. Ronald and Bianca were just like really young. Not to say Monica wasn't young, because she was, and she was taking care of her kids. But some people are different. They were just this young ass couple. They like to drink. They like to party. They like to smoke weed. I'd like to think that Bianca wasn't doing these things while she was pregnant with the couple's child. But given how this case goes, I don't really have much faith in these two human beings. And I don't know if Ronald was not a great person independently, or if being with Bianca, they just brought out the worst in each other. But even his own family wasn't really supportive of the relationship, and his own mother called him a, quote, deadbeat, just like his father. That didn't really stop them, though, because ain't nobody want to see them together, but it don't matter now, because I got you, babe. And in October of 2011, their first baby came into the world, and they were welcoming a baby girl, a little sister for Samiah. It was shortly after the birth of the couple's own daughter that Ronald and Bianca sort of started to get their shit together a little bit. They were still partying and drinking and smoking and all that shit, but they also got their own apartment and they were starting to just try to be more stable, have a place to like raise their new tiny family. And it was at this time that Monica, Samiah's mother, started to work full-time as well. And in addition to that, wanted her daughter to have a relationship with her father, if at all possible. So she started letting Samiah go over and spend time with Ronald and Bianca and her new baby sister during the times that Monica was busy at work or, doing anything else. She was just giving him like visitation. So she'd have an opportunity to get to know her dad, get to know her new baby sister and her stepmom, though Bianca and Ronald never officially did get married. Now, I'm not entirely sure why, but in early 2012, Samiah started staying with Ronald and Bianca full-time. And there are different reportings on how this came to be. In some sources, it says that Samiah went over for a visit and that he just like never gave her back. But there's also, I listened to an interview with one of the detectives on the case, and he said that initially Samiah was permitted to live with Ronald because at the time Ronald had a house or a place to live, an apartment, and that he had a full-time job. Like he was able to financially take care of her and more importantly, wanted to take care of his daughter. So that's how she ended up being in his possession. And that eventually he just sort of stopped letting her see her extended family, that the couple started to move around a lot, making them difficult to find. And I'm not sure why, as soon as he started doing this, the cops weren't called. Hindsight's 2020, but for whatever reason they weren't. And now Samiah was in the care of Bianca and Ronald instead of her mother, Monica, and her mother's family. And Ronald and Bianca enrolled her in preschool. And from the outside, to some people at least, it seemed like things were actually going well and things were working. But eventually, Ronald started completely isolating her, Ronald and Bianca. Who's to say who was the leader in this? Started to completely isolate Samiah from her other family, and they just didn't know where she was or how she was, and no one spoke to her for a while. And that's really sad, in addition to a lot of things, because Samiah was very close with both her mother and her grandfather, and they just hadn't heard from her, hadn't seen her, didn't know where she was or what she was up to and what was going on with Ronald. Samiah's Aunt Lori said that the last time she saw Samiah was Christmas of 2011, so about a year before this takes place, and that they had been together for Christmas. Everything had been sweet. Everything had been wonderful. And that after Samiah had opened all of her presents, she went and like all cheerfully in her little, like kids at Christmas in their little pajamas with their little hair. And she went and gave every single person there a hug and told them thank you. It just makes my heart ache because she was just a little girl, she was just a little kid. And people are fucking monster animals. So now we're going to fast forward to a year later, and it's December 27th, 2012, and police received an anonymous tip that Samiah is missing, hasn't been seen for a long time, and that they were worried something really up had happened to her. And for a long while, who the anonymous tip was kept anonymous, but I did listen to a podcast episode from Suffer the Little Children where the host of this podcast sat down and had an interview with one of the police officers on the case, because if you read articles, everything says anonymous, but in this interview, he said who it was, and it turns out that the person who called the police was the boyfriend of Bianca's cousin, Rayshawn's sister. Don't know her name. Either way. It seems that the parties involved in what happened to Samiah were being pretty tight-lipped about what they did, obviously, and that they took like a vow of silence at first, but after a couple of days, Bianca's cousin Rayshawn, who, spoiler alert, was involved, couldn't take it. The guilt was getting to him, and he just needed to say something to somebody, so he told his sister and his sister's boyfriend what had happened. And the boyfriend, almost immediately upon learning this information, was like, what the fuck? And called the police and reported it. So due to this anonymous call, police were on the lookout for Ronald and Bianca. And I have to imagine that they searched the couple's home first, but though that is not where they ended up finding him. They ended up actually spotting My brain is off. They ended up spotting Ronald in his car and they pulled him over. And in the car, he had his daughter that he had with Bianca. And it was noted that Samiah wasn't there. So they were like, hey, where's your daughter, Samiah? And he was like, oh, she's with her mother, Monica. But police were able to quickly figure out that this wasn't true because when they contacted Monica, she's like, what the fuck? No, she's been in Ronald's care for almost an entire year. And plus, I believe at this point they had already talked to Rayshawn. So when police are having him tell them an obvious blatant lie, they're just kind of listening to him and like, interesting that you say that, considering we have other people who are saying the complete opposite of that. So from there, the police go to the apartment that Ronald and Bianca shared that was located at the 11,900 block of Lee Avenue in Adelanto, California, to question them and search the home. Now, initially, police questioned the two separately, and they both had very different stories about where Samiah was. She was either with a friend or with a family member. Definitely not here, but not to worry. She was so fucking safe. Like, nothing to look at over here. Everything is fine. But police didn't really believe them, and they pressed him a little farther, still separately at this point. And this is when Bianca tells police, okay, my cousin Rayshawn did everything. Like, we were fine. Samiah was fine. Everything was cool as a cucumber. We left her with Rayshawn while we went to dinner, and when we came back from dinner, she was just gone. And police didn't really believe that. And then they ended up questioning the two together. They brought them together and started questioning them together and talking about the inconsistencies in their stories. And that's when the real story started to be told. Now, it hasn't been completely disclosed what was said between police and Ronald and Bianca that day, but in response to whatever they learned, police headed out to the Mojave Desert near Baker, California. If you've never been to the Mojave Desert, you've probably seen pictures of Joshua trees. It's like what we're known for. I'm still there. It's what that area is known for. I never saw the appeal, but I also lived there. And Baker, California is a little dirt spot on the way to Las Vegas, for your reference. And Baker, if you've never been there, so off subject, there's a place there called the Mad Greek Cafe that just has the best food. And every time me and my husband, anytime we go to Vegas, we stop there. It's totally irrelevant to the story, but just so you know of the area, if you're ever driving to Vegas, when you go through Baker, the place with the giant thermometer, go to the Mad Greek Cafe. Anyway, so police went out to Baker and they started searching the desert. Now, how they would find the right patch of desert, I have no idea, because if you've ever been there, it's literally all of Baker, all of the high desert is just dirt and Joshua trees as far as the eye can see. Like, everything looks pretty similar. But somehow they did find the right location. They found the right patch of land. And when they searched there, they found Samiah wrapped in a princess sleeping bag and buried in a shallow grave. A sheriff who was part of this investigation said, and I quote, "At the conclusion of the interviews, investigators were led to an area in the desert south of Baker, California. A small grave was located where the 4-year-old's remains were recovered." In response to this discovery, police not only arrested 21-year-old Ronald and 19-year-old Bianca, but they also arrested Bianca's cousin, 26-year-old Rayshawn. The DA on this case said, and I quote, "Torturing a child in San Bernardino County will be met with the most vigorous of prosecutions, and those responsible will be held accountable for their actions." One of the things that's very frustrating about this case is once it was, found that she had been murdered and everything came out, it was discovered that CPS had an open case file on Samiah since late 2012, since the month that she was murdered. And there were reports of both neglect and child abuse against Samiah. So CPS became involved in this case after members of the school, teachers, principals, people who were responsible for reporting, reported to CPS that Samiah had come to school with a black and swollen eye. And when they had asked Samiah, how she got the injury, she said that Bianca, her dad's girlfriend, had beat her with a belt, and that's what caused the injury to her eye. So the school officials waited, and when Ronald came to pick her up that day, they asked him, like, how did this happen? And he told them that Samiah was playing with her baby brother, and her baby brother had accidentally caused the injury to her eye. Which made no sense because her baby brother lived with her mother, Monica, not with Ronald and Bianca and Samiah. So he couldn't have really caused that injury since he wasn't there. So a social worker did end up seeing Samiah, meeting with Samiah, and saw her injuries and her bruises, and took this information back to the supervisors and told them, like, this is what I saw, what is the game plan, what should we do? And for whatever reason, it was decided that Samiah should stay in that home. I don't know why that would be, but that was their decision. And that there would just be some follow-ups to make sure that she was okay. But the follow-up got delayed and kept getting delayed and kept getting delayed because apparently the social worker who was assigned to Samiah's case had like 100 cases at that time. And you can only do so much. You know what I mean? You can only see so many kids in a day. And by the time they made it back to Samiah to do another check and make sure she was still okay, she was already dead. On January 9th, 2013, Samiah's funeral took place. Her grave marker is covered in little hearts, and it says, quote, "Mommy's bundle of love, forever missed, loved, and never forgotten." So, Ronald Dean Greer Jr. and Bianca Annie Mae Stanch were booked on suspicion of murder and assault on a child. And Rayshawn Larice Stanch was booked for murder and a parole violation because during this time, Rayshawn was on parole. It was reported that, quote, "They did unlawfully, having care and custody of Samiah Christine Cornell Downing, a child under the age of 8 years, assault that child by means of force that to a reasonable person would be likely to produce bodily injury, resulting in the child's death." Rayshawn, I believe, was held without bail. Then both Ronald and Bianca were held at a bail of $1.25 million. It came out that both Ronald and Rayshawn actually had criminal records prior to what happened to Samiah. Ronald had a prior criminal record for burglary, having stolen property, like being in the possession of stolen property, and vandalizing property, and running from the police. And for this, he spent a couple months in jail and was given probation. Rayshawn had a prior criminal record for assault with a deadly weapon, but had just gotten a couple months in jail and probation for this. He had also been arrested and charged again for assault with a deadly weapon, and this time child abuse as well, and spent 3 years in jail. He was also ordered to take anger management classes and rehab, and a restraining order was filed against him, along with various other smaller crimes, and he was on probation at the time of Samiah's murder. So Ronald and Bianca were brought in to make their pleas, and when they were brought in, they were wearing green jumpsuits because they were in protective custody, probably because people don't like people who murder children. And they both pled not guilty. And I believe Rayshawn initially pled not guilty to his charges as well. So during the course of this trial, like they weren't okay, my brain is going too fast. You know how you get arrested and then you're supposed to have a trial, but there's always like things that happen, things that delay it, things that push it off. Well, this trial took a very long time to take place, and the trio ended up changing attorneys several times during this time. And when it finally came down to it, Rayshawn was severed. So basically what happened is Ronald and Bianca were going to be tried together, but a motion was filed to have Rayshawn severed so that he would be heard separately, because essentially Ronald and Bianca decided to just turn on Rayshawn and say that everything was him. Which is so fucked up. Like, that's your family. But, I mean, I'm not expecting, like, great people, great morals and ethics out of these people. So, oh, it makes me crazy, bro. It makes me crazy. Kids' cases make me insane. So Rayshawn, who was, by the way, legally blind, not to say he couldn't see anything, but, legally blind just means that you see very poorly. And he had some mental impairments as well. He ended up agreeing to a plea bargain. And in this plea deal, he would plead guilty to the willful cruelty of a child, but in exchange, the murder, there's cat hair and everything. The murder charges would be dropped, and he was required to testify against both Ronald and Bianca at their hearings. And I actually don't know what the fate of Rayshawn was, because this all just happened. Like, though the murder happened in 2012, the hearing didn't start until 2020. Okay. And Rayshawn was going to be testifying against Bianca and Ronald. And after that, his hearing and his sentencing was going to take place. But I have found nothing on whether or not his sentencing actually has taken place. I even did an inmate search and everything, and I found nothing on him. But I mean, think of how many delays there were just to get to this point, right? 2012, 2020. And we're still in the throes of COVID, and courts are closing again. I don't know if you know, but it doesn't matter. Courthouses are closing again. So it's likely that he has not yet been sentenced. Anyway, so as I said, this case was halted several times. Like, trying to get this trial started was a bitch and a half, and the prosecution would always object to all the defense's requests to continue, but unfortunately the continuances still kept happening because the defense kept requesting continuances to, you know, be ready for trial. They kept switching attorneys. There's lots of reasons that these things happen. Finally, it was set to start taking place, the trial that is, in March of 2020, but then it got halted again because COVID was like, I'm here, get used to it, because I'm not going anywhere. Who's still surprised that we're still here? We're still fucking here. So the courthouses were closed for a long time. There were lots of delays in trials, if you don't know, because like this is what I do at work. Other than this, which is hobby, really. It's not a money-making machine, let me tell you that. But my job, I'm a paralegal, doesn't matter. But courthouses were closed for a while. All hearings were continued over and over and over for a while. But finally, things started to kind of even out, and courthouses opened again. And when that did happen, the prosecution pushed to have this case made a priority and heard right away because of how many delays there had already been and how long this family had already waited for justice, since it had been 8-9 years at this point, and they were successful. The trial included 6 weeks of evidence, and the prosecution ended up calling over 20 witnesses in order to try to illustrate, what had happened to Samiah, how bad these people were to her, and, just trying to make their case as strong as possible. The witnesses talked about the way Samiah was treated in the house she was living in, and they also testified about just what a sweet and loving and wonderful girl Samiah was. During this time, the prosecutor also talked about how Samiah's murder had affected the community, saying, and I quote, "When Samiah was murdered, our community was also greatly affected by the actions of her killers. From Samiah's extended family, friends, and teachers, to the law enforcement officers investigating this crime, to everyone in the district attorney's office that had a part in this case, we will always hold Samiah in our memory and in our hearts." So now let's talk about the trial that finally eventually did take place. Let's talk about what came out at trial, what Rayshawn testified happened to Samiah, and this is going to be the point where things get a little more rough. On July 28th, 2020, the trial of Bianca and Ronald began, and Rayshawn testified at this trial. And he testified to the fact that Samiah was relentlessly beaten and tortured at the hands of his cousin Bianca Stanch, and that Ronald Greer, her father, fucking Samiah's father, did nothing to stop it. He also testified that both Ronald and Bianca would use withholding food and water from Samiah, who was 4 years old, as a punishment to her. And he said that on either the night that she died or the night before she died, I believe it was probably the night before, but it doesn't matter. It does. That Bianca had made dinner, and that Samiah said that she didn't like whatever they were having. So in response, Bianca's like, "Well, then you don't get to fucking eat. You can starve then." And that from that point on till the point that she did die, Rayshawn never saw her eat or drink again, that they didn't allow her to eat or drink again. And at this time, Rayshawn was living in the apartment with Ronald and Bianca, so he would have seen this. He even reported that at one point, Samiah had been so thirsty that she drank whatever she could find that was present at the time, and that what she ended up drinking was cleaning solution because this little baby was so thirsty. Now, this I do not believe happened the night before she was murdered, and they have said that drinking the cleaning solution did not affect her in that it was responsible at all for her murder. It had nothing to do with how she died. This is just to illustrate the abuse that she suffered prior to dying. Bianca Stanch hated Samiah. Now, why? It hasn't really come out, but I mean, I think we can take some guesses. Maybe it's because Samiah reminded her that her boyfriend, her baby daddy, as she called him, had a girlfriend, had been intimate with somebody prior to her, or maybe she was pissed off taking care of somebody's kid that wasn't hers, and maybe she hated Monica. It's really hard to say. But because of this, she fucking tortured this 4-year-old child until she was dead, and her dad did nothing to stop it. And I believe he was more involved than he says, for sure, because there were also reports that both Bianca and Ronald would duct tape Samiah's hands together and duct tape her wrists together and then lock her in her room so that she couldn't move. They had also installed a deadbolt on the outside of her door, so that in the hallway, so that they could put her in and lock her in and just leave her in there as long as they wanted, without food, without water. Just locking this little girl in a prison. And they would just keep Samiah in there as long as they wanted, whenever they wanted to. Evidence in trial showed that the day that Bianca was killed, she was tortured pretty badly. She was forced to stand in a corner for 8 straight hours without moving, without going to the bathroom, without eating anything. And after that, Bianca beat her all over her body with cords and belts. And then at some point, this evil woman took a pot of boiling water and poured it onto Samiah's back and shoulders. So she had burns all over her back, her shoulders, and her chest. This was a 4-year-old child. Prosecutors said of this night, and I quote, "On the evening of her death, Samiah was acting lethargic and sleepy. She was locked inside a bedroom within the apartment and was left with Stanch's cousin, Rayshawn Stanch, while Stanch and Greer went to dinner." So literally, after making her stand in a corner for 8 hours, beating her all over her body with belts and cords, and then pouring boiling hot water on a 4-year-old child's back and shoulders and chest, water that was hot enough to rip the skin. They then locked her in her bedroom. They deadbolted her in her bedroom and left to go out and have dinner while Rayshawn stayed in the apartment. That's so fucking evil. Like, I can't even wrap my brain around how a person could do something like that. And they believe this was the day that she died, and that they believe that this was on December 15th, 2012. So just 2 months before her 5th birthday. Once Ronald and Bianca returned home from their dinner that evening, they found that Samiah was dead in her bedroom. So the 3 of them then had to figure out what they were going to do about this. And what they landed on was that they were going to just get rid of her body. So they took her, they wrapped her up in this princess sleeping bag and loaded her in the car, and then drove out to that place in the desert in Baker, California, about an hour and a half from her home, and they buried her in a shallow grave. So police thought for sure that Samiah had to have died because of her injuries, because to just look at her once they had found her, it was clear that she had been so badly brutalized that, of course, this would kill a 4-year-old child. But when an autopsy was done, it was found that her cause of death was dehydration, which meant that she could have lived through all of these injuries we've talked about if they had just given her some water. If they had just given her some food and water, as crazy as it sounds, she could have lived through what they did to her. To think about the fact that she could have lived through all of that, but was so just neglected that it was a lack of water, just breaks my heart. And when they found her, she was also incredibly malnourished. Just 6 months prior, she had been tested, and she was in the 5th percentile of her weight class, which means that prior to being with Ronald and Bianca, she was taken care of. But just 6 months later, she was in the 50th percentile. So she went from the 5th percentile to the 50th percentile. So she just quickly, in just 6 months, had just withered away. At trial, Ronald testified, which I guess was something that his attorney didn't really want him to do, but he did it anyway. And he testified that during the time that all of this was happening to Samiah, he had developed a pretty serious drug problem. Coke, weed, alcohol, all that. And because of that, though he was there, technically, he wasn't really there when all of this was happening. He said that he never noticed anything bad happening to Samiah because of his drug use and just being out of it. But it came out that, like, when he was very first arrested, they took his blood. Like, they had the foresight to take his blood, and it was tested, and it was found that this wasn't true. He didn't have evidence of having a serious substance abuse problem that would have caused him to, like, not notice his child was being abused. And in addition to that, he testified that when it came to the water deprivation, that he never withheld water from her. That, like, at nighttime, at a certain time of night, they would stop giving her water so she wouldn't wet the bed, but that he didn't restrict her day and night. He also testified at trial that he never saw any of Samiah's injuries, ever. None of these were visible to him. Even as he wrapped her dead body in her princess sleeping bag, he didn't notice any of these injuries. He did not know that they even existed until the photos were shown of her body at trial. The DA's office said of his testimony, and I quote, "Several inconsistencies emerged during cross-examination on the events of 2012 and what Greer knew about how Samiah was being treated." I do not believe, even a fucking little bit, that Ronald did not see the injuries to his child. There was no part of Samiah's body that was not injured when they found her. She had bruises and wounds and burns on her body. She had defensive wounds on her little hands. She had 10 to 20 U-shaped bruises on her body that are common for beatings with a cord, along with plenty of belt injuries all over her body from her ankles to the top of her head. And though some of these injuries were older, many of them were new, received just hours before her death. She also had these marks on her face, along with a blunt force injury to her forehead that split her skin, but did not crack her skull. Plus the injuries on her back and her shoulders and her chest from the boiling water, because the water was hot enough that it ripped this child's skin. So I just have a little trouble believing that this guy was completely oblivious to his 4-year-old daughter suffering. Maybe that's just me. Let me know what you think. Do you think it's possible that he just missed all of this somehow? Or do you think he just let it happen? Or alternatively, that he was involved? Samiah's grandma, Christina, not to be confused with Christine, which is who she was named for, who had passed away, but Christina said of what happened to Samiah, and I quote, "The sweetest, most kindest, most lovable little girl in the world. And the manner she was murdered and taken away. It's like, who does that to a child? She was murdered and tortured and so brutal, and it sits in the back of your mind, in your head, especially when you've seen it all and you've heard everything. And you're like, she was just 4 years old. How can somebody stand that much pain and torture?" In the end, a jury found Ronald Greer and Bianca Stanch guilty of murder, torture, and willfully causing or permitting a child to suffer with a special allegation of causing death. They were found guilty of this in October of 2020, and their sentencing hearing was set for March of 2021. On Friday, March 12th, 2021, so nearly 10 years after Samiah's murder, Bianca Annie Mae Stanch and Ronald Dean Greer Jr. were sentenced to 32 years to life in prison. The deputy district attorney said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, because of the actions of her father and his girlfriend, Samiah wasn't here to tell her own story to the jurors. Thankfully, the evidence at trial told the tragic story for her. Samiah was betrayed by the people closest to her, and they have now been held accountable for that betrayal." The San Bernardino County Prosecutor's Office also urged those who heard about Samiah's case, knew of Samiah's case, or just hearing about it for the first time, to be vigilant and to keep their eyes open because they could potentially save a child's life, because many people knew or suspected that something was going on with Samiah and that something was happening to her, but nobody did anything to stop it. Nobody did anything to help her, and nobody noticed the warning signs, like the marks on her being isolated from her family, a deadbolt on the outside of her door. Nobody saw these things and put two and two together, or if they did, they didn't do anything about it. So officials said, kind of urging the parents and the guardians, not even the people who see these things happening, but the people who are experiencing the frustrations and the difficulties of being a parent or a guardian or somebody, anybody who's taking care of children. And I quote, "If you are a parent or a guardian of a child and are experiencing frustration, anger, or helplessness, please reach out for help. There are plenty of resources available which will help you while keeping your child safe from verbal, psychological, and physical abuse." Samiah's grandfather, Christopher, who he nicknamed Samiah Little Peanut, and she called him Papa. Fucking kill me. He's been having a lot of trouble, at least he was, I'm sure he still is, with losing Samiah. Not only losing her, but losing her in the way that he did, and in having to have the realization that her own father had something to do with what happened to her. Like, to know that a 4-year-old is gone is already so hard, and then just to know how and what she went through, I don't know how anybody deals with it. I don't know. It seems impossible. And he has said, and I quote, "If I thought any of this would have happened, if I thought she was in any danger, she would have been with me. She was just like any other little girl visiting her father." He continued by saying, quote, "I still don't understand. There's nothing in the world a baby could do to deserve even a part of this." This little girl just had so many people who cared about her, man, and it's just that her fucking dickhead dad and his piece of shit girlfriend were not among those people. And it's just crazy to think about the fact that they had another child in that house, another daughter who was seemingly cared for while Samiah went through all she went through. It makes me fucking insane. Samiah's Aunt Lori said of her, and I quote, "We want her to be remembered, and for people to remember that she was loved and she was taken good care of by our family, that she wasn't abandoned with these people." She also said of Samiah and how just like what a delight she was to be around and what a wonderful person she was. And I quote, "I'll always remember she always had a smile on her face. She was kind of shy and bashful when she meets people for the first time, but she was always smiling, happy, and really playful." And that's who the world lost that day, for absolutely no reason at all. So that, my friends, is the story of the horrific and tragic murder of 4-year-old Samiah Downing. Isn't that just one of the most upsetting things that you've ever heard? This was a very difficult case to look into, and it was also a very difficult case to research because there really isn't a lot of information on Samiah out there, which is just so frustrating. And it's also frustrating because I feel like this is the type of case that we should have all heard about and been outraged by because it's been insane. But yet I did not even hear of her or knew that she had existed until this year, 2022. When I'm filming this right now, it's January, or I believe watching this at the end of February. And I just learned about her case, even though it literally happened 10 years ago now. And it makes me so frustrated to hear that it took that long for her family to get justice. I mean, 10 years. 10, almost 10 years from the time she was killed to the time they were sentenced. Makes me so fucking mad. And it makes me wonder about the San Bernardino County fucking court system, to be quite honest with you. I know this happens in other places as well, but in San Bernardino County, that's actually the county that my friends were murdered in. And it also took their families, my friends' families, 10 years, 10 or more, to get the sentencing and to get the justice. So it really makes me wonder about San Bernardino County. I don't know what's going on out there, but it's just like unacceptable, man. It's crazy to think that you have to wait 10 years for something like that, especially when they're caught right away and it's so clear cut what happened. It makes me fucking crazy. It's just so unfair to leave these families in limbo for so long because it doesn't give them a chance to really have any real closure and start to heal because it's still ongoing forever. And to speak to that, even though these fucking assholes were just sentenced, Ronald has already fucking tried to appeal. I haven't seen anything of its success, but still, this family suffers and will continue to suffer because of things like this. And I hope in this asshole, none of these two get out of jail for what they've done, because they're absolute monsters. Especially when speaking to Ronald, because as a parent, as a human being, it is your duty, it is your fucking job, and it should be just an inherent drive that you have within yourself to protect your children. But this guy didn't have that and did quite the opposite. And to think about what happened to her and that he just sat by and allowed it, the person that's supposed to die for you, you know what I mean? Like, this is supposed to be the person who would do literally anything for you, and he did nothing. To let her suffer as horribly as she did for as long as she did is unexcusable and unacceptable. And he might as well have poured that boiling water on her himself, in my mind, because really, I hardly see a difference. Just imagine for a moment what life was like for Samiah. To be beaten and tortured, and to look around and see no one in her corner, no one there to look to and to run to and to feel comfort in. Nobody who made her feel safe. To look around and see everyone else getting fed, getting water. To look at her little sister and see her being loved and cared for. And then to have all of that happening to her. How scared and hurt emotionally and physically and just confused this little girl must have been at what was happening to her. It makes me absolutely fucking crazy. And just so fucking sad. That's the saddest thing. That, yeah, it fucks up my brain. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope that you found it interesting and informative, and that it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case, because this is a case that's definitely worth remembering and worth talking about. And of course, I want to thank you for hanging out and remembering Samiah with me today. She was a beautiful little girl with her entire life ahead of her, who did nothing, did and could not have done anything to deserve what happened to her. And her life was cut short by these two pieces of actual shit. And I gotta be honest, I hope they die in jail. Is that too harsh? Maybe it is, but I don't really give a fuck. I don't. Please let me know of any cases you would like to see me cover down below, because as you know, I have a long list of cases, but anytime you leave a suggestion, I try to look into it so that I can cover it, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell, because I put out a new video every week and I'd love to hang out with you. Yes, you specifically, you. And if you'd like to hang out more consistently, you can follow me on all my social media. Everything's linked down below. I've got an Instagram, I got a Twitter, I got a Facebook page, and I got a Facebook group. And with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday. And I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.